In this video, we're going to break down 6 parents who turned into killers. Let's get started. Chris Watts, the Frederick family annihilator. Christopher Lee Watts was a 3-year-old father who strangled his pregnant wife and smothered his 2 young daughters in August 2018 before dumping their bodies at an oil site where he worked. Chris Watts came from Spring Lake, North Carolina, while Shanann Catherine Razuchek was from Aberdeen, North Carolina. The two met in 2010 through mutual friends and started dating. After 2 years together, they got married on the 3rd of November 2012 in Mecklenburg County. They seemed like any normal couple starting their life together with dreams and plans for the future. The couple decided to move west and fell in love with Colorado during a trip. They purchased a 5-bedroom home at 2,825 Saratoga Trail in Frederick, Colorado in 2013. The house cost them $400,000. Frederick was a small bedroom community about 27 miles north of Denver, with a population of around 8,700 people. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other and families felt safe. On the 17th of December 2013, their first daughter, Bella Marie Watts, was born. She had her father's eyes and quickly became the center of their world. Less than 2 years later, on the 17th of July 2015, they welcomed their second daughter, Celeste Catherine Watts, who they called Cece for short. From the outside, the Watts family looked picture perfect. Shanann was very active on social media, constantly posting photos and videos of her daughters, her husband, and their life together. Chris worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum, an oil and gas company. He would leave for work early in the morning, usually around 5:15 or 5:30 a.m. Shanann worked from home as a sales representative for Lavelle, a multi-level marketing company that sold health and wellness products called Thrive. She traveled frequently for the company, attending conferences and meetings with her team. But behind the happy Facebook posts and smiling family photos, the Watts family was struggling financially. In 2015, just 2 years after buying their home, Chris and Shanann filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. According to their bankruptcy documents, they had nearly $450,000 in liabilities. They owed about $70,000 in combined student loan debt and credit card bills. Despite making a combined income of around $100,000 a year, they had a mortgage payment of $3,000 per month. The financial pressure was always there, hanging over them like a dark cloud. In late 2017, Shanann found out she was pregnant with their 3rd child. On the 3rd of November 2017, she posted a video on Facebook celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary. In the caption, she wrote loving words about Chris. She said that 7 years ago she fell in love with him, and 5 years ago she married her best friend and soulmate. She said their love grew stronger every day. At that time, she had no idea what was coming. The couple announced in June 2018 that they were expecting a boy. Shanann was thrilled. She posted a video of the gender reveal on Facebook, showing Chris walking into a room while she wore a shirt that said, "Oops, we did it again." They planned to name their son Nico Lee Watts. By August 2018, Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant. But something had changed in Chris Watts. Starting in the summer of 2018, friends and co-workers noticed he was different. Brian Spence, a contractor who had worked with Chris for several years, later told reporters that he watched Chris get more and more unhappy with his life. Chris went from being a friendly guy to being withdrawn and angry. He lost his temper over little workplace annoyances. He became irritable and combative with contractors. In May or June 2018, Chris met a woman named Nicole Kessinger at work. Nicole was a contract employee for Anadarko Petroleum, working in the environmental department as a geologist. Chris had recently been promoted from rover to field coordinator, which meant he spent more time in the office instead of out in the field. This is how he kept running into Nicole. Chris told investigators that he met Nicole when he brought a broken gas meter to her office to be fixed. After that first meeting, they kept bumping into each other around the office. The 4th time they met, she asked him about something he said. He had mentioned, "We moved to Colorado from North Carolina." Nicole asked what he meant by "we," and Chris showed her pictures of Bella and Celeste on his phone. He did not mention his wife. He also did not wear his wedding ring at work. Chris later said the ring was being resized because he had lost weight and it kept falling off his finger, but that may have been a lie. By early July 2018, Chris and Nicole were exchanging text messages that went to a different level. They started meeting outside of work. Their first meeting was after Chris returned from a trip to San Diego with Shanann in June. After that trip, Chris and Nicole met at a park in Thornton, Colorado. From there, they began seeing each other regularly, about 4 or 5 times a week. Nicole later told police she was attracted to Chris from the first time they met. She said he seemed soft-spoken and was a good listener. Chris told her he was separated from his wife and that they were in the process of getting a divorce. He said the split was mutual and nearly final. He showed Nicole that he had 2 daughters but never mentioned that his wife was pregnant with their 3rd child. Nicole believed everything he told her. The two went on dates throughout July. Chris took her to a car museum in Boulder, which he said he enjoyed. They went to a drag race at Bandimere Speedway, which reminded him of his childhood. They also went camping at Great Sand Dunes National Park over the July 4th holiday weekend, something Chris said he had always wanted to do. He took intimate photos of Nicole during their trips together and kept them hidden on his phone. In late July, Chris told Nicole that his divorce was finalized. He spun an elaborate story about looking for a 2-bedroom apartment to move into, now that his marriage was ending. He said he hoped to list his house on the market soon. He even asked for Nicole's help in finding a suitable apartment for him and his daughters. She had no reason to doubt him. In early August, Chris told Nicole he loved her. Meanwhile, Shanann was noticing that something was very wrong with her marriage. In early June 2018, Shanann and the girls traveled to North Carolina to spend 6 weeks with her family. Chris was supposed to join them for part of the trip, but even when he did fly out to North Carolina, he was distant and cold. When Shanann picked him up at the airport, he did not run to her and kiss her like he normally would. He was not interested in taking pictures together, which was very unusual for him. During those 6 weeks apart, Shanann sent Chris text messages trying to understand what was happening to their relationship. On August 7, she texted a close friend and said that Chris told her he was scared to death about their 3rd baby. She said Chris was happy with just Bella and Celeste and did not want another baby. In other text messages to Chris, Shanann wrote about what was missing in their relationship. She said it was only one-way emotions and feelings. She told him she could not come back home like this and needed him to meet her halfway. She said Chris did not consider others at all and did not think about other people's feelings. Shanann also wrote that while she was carrying their 3rd child and fighting with 2 kids daily and trying to work and make money, Chris was working and living the bachelor life. She said it was not hard to text "love you" and "miss you." She told him if he did not mean it, she understood, but they needed to talk. She said she kept looking at her phone all night with no response from him. She reminded him they did not just start dating yesterday. They had been together 8 years and had 2.5 kids together. Just days before the murders, Shanann wrote Chris a handwritten letter. She took photos of different drafts of this letter on her phone. In the letter, she said she did not know where to begin and was lost for words. She wrote that she could not even explain how hard the pain hurt. She said the last 5 weeks had been so hard. She told Chris she would do anything for him and their marriage. There was also family tension that made things worse. During the North Carolina visit, Chris's mother, Cindy Watts, bought pistachio ice cream, but Celeste was allergic to nuts, which caused Shanann to yell at Cindy about the ice cream choice. Cindy then kicked Shanann out of the house. This caused a big rift in the family, and Shanann stopped talking to Chris's parents after that incident. By August 2018, Shanann suspected Chris was having an affair. She texted a friend saying she thought he might be cheating. She was right, but she had no proof yet. On August 11, Shanann left for a work trip to Scottsdale, Arizona, for a Lavelle leadership seminar. While she was away, Chris hired a babysitter on August 12, claiming he was going to attend a Colorado Rockies baseball game with coworkers. Instead, he took Nicole on a date to a sports bar in Erie, Colorado. He paid for their dinner with a debit card linked to the family bank account. Shanann would see this transaction, and Chris knew it. Later, he told investigators he knew something was not right. He knew that Shanann knew. He said using the bank card and not trying to hide it was the last straw. Early in the morning of the 13th of August 2018, at approximately 1:48 a.m., Shanann returned home from her business trip. A neighbor's security camera captured her friend Nicole Atkinson dropping Shanann off at their home on Saratoga Trail. Chris was inside the house with Bella and Celeste. According to Chris's later confession, Shanann initiated sex when she came home. Afterward, they went to bed. A few hours later, Chris woke Shanann up while he was getting ready to go to work. He wanted to talk about their marriage and their future. For some unknown reason, Chris climbed on top of Shanann and straddled her while they talked. He told her he did not think they were compatible anymore. He said he did not think their relationship was going to work. He admitted to her that he was having an affair and wanted a divorce. According to Chris, Shanann told him that if he left, he would never see the kids again. In that moment, something inside Chris Watts snapped. He strangled his wife to death with his bare hands while she lay in their bed. She fought back, her eyes filled with blood as she looked at him. Then she was gone. Chris later wrote in a letter that he knew she was dead when she released her bowels. 4-year-old Bella woke up and walked into the bedroom. She saw what was happening and asked, "What's wrong with Mommy?" Chris told his daughter that Mommy was sick and did not feel good. He lied to Bella and said they needed to take her to the hospital. Chris wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet and carried her downstairs. He loaded her body into the back seat of his work truck, laying her on the floor. Then, he did something unthinkable. He put both of his daughters into the back seat of the truck. Bella and Celeste were still alive. They were still in their nightgowns. He did not put them in their car seats. Chris drove approximately 45 minutes from their home in Frederick to a remote oil well site called Survey State Well Pump on Weld County Road 8, north of Roggen, Colorado. This was an Anadarko petroleum property where Chris worked. During the drive, Bella complained about a smell. She could smell her dead mother in the truck with them. When they arrived at the oil site around 5 a.m., Chris took Shanann's body out first. He used a rake to try to clear some brush and weeds, but the rake broke. Then he grabbed a shovel and dug a shallow grave. He buried Shanann in that grave near 2 large oil storage tanks. At the highest point of her buried body, there were only 3 inches of dirt covering her. She was still wearing her shirt, bra, and underwear. Then Chris turned to his daughters. According to his confession in February 2019, Chris smothered 3-year-old Celeste first. He used her favorite blanket to suffocate her in the back seat of his truck. 4-year-old Bella watched this happen. She watched her father kill her little sister. Then it was Bella's turn. Bella knew what was coming. She begged her father, saying, "Daddy, no." She asked if he was going to do to her what he did to Cece. Bella fought back. She struggled against her father as he smothered her with his bare hands. But she was only 4 years old and could not fight off a grown man. After both of his daughters were dead, Chris did something that haunted investigators for months. He took each of their small bodies and pushed them through 8-inch hatches at the top of 2 separate crude oil storage tanks. The tanks were mostly full of oil. Bella's body was pushed into the west tank. Celeste's body was pushed into the east tank. Bella had scratches on her left buttock from being shoved through the small opening. Investigators later found a tuft of blonde hair on the edge of one of the hatches. Chris also placed garbage bags over Shanann's head and feet before he buried her, supposedly so the girls would not have to see her face during the drive. He left these bags at the scene, along with a bedsheet that matched sheets and pillowcases found in the trash at their home. After disposing of all 3 bodies, Chris Watts drove back home. He took a shower and got ready for work, like it was any normal day. Security footage from a neighbor's camera showed Chris backing his truck into his garage at approximately 5:27 a.m. that morning, just minutes before he said he left for work. This proved he was still at home after Shanann arrived, which would later contradict his initial story to police. Later that morning, Shanann was supposed to go to a doctor's appointment for her pregnancy. She did not show up. Her friend Nicole Atkinson tried calling and texting Shanann multiple times, but got no response. Nicole knew something was very wrong because Shanann was always active on her phone and would never miss a doctor's appointment. At approximately 1:40 p.m. on August 13, Nicole went to the Watts house to check on Shanann. She knocked on the door but got no answer. She called Chris at work. She also called the Frederick Police Department to request a welfare check. Officer Scott Coonrod arrived at the house shortly after. When Chris arrived home from work around 2 p.m., his behavior immediately seemed off to the investigators. Body camera footage from Officer Coonrod shows Chris running up to meet the police officer, but his facial expression showed no stress, pain, or suffering. Body language experts later said this was a red flag. Chris went into his house alone for more than a minute before opening the door to let police and Nicole inside. Once inside, he walked away from the door as police entered. This was another unusual sign. He seemed to want to separate himself from what was being discussed rather than actively engaging in the effort to find his wife. Police searched the house and found Shanann's purse with her car keys, phone, and medication inside. Shanann had lupus and would never leave without her medication. Her car was in the garage. Her wedding ring was sitting on the bedside table. All the girls' car seats were still in her vehicle. Everything pointed to the fact that Shanann and the girls never left the house. Chris gave interviews to local news stations that day. He appeared on camera pleading for his family to return. In one interview with Denver 7, Chris said, "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. If somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring them back." But even during these interviews, Chris's behavior was strange. He spoke about his family in past tense, as if they were already dead. He showed no real emotion. Investigators with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, especially Agent Tammy Lee, noticed these red flags immediately. She wanted to get Chris Watts into an interrogation room as soon as possible. On August 14, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation activated an endangered missing alert for Shanann and her daughters. The FBI also joined the search. The case was getting major media attention. People across Colorado and the country were watching and hoping the family would be found safe. On August 15, Chris agreed to come to the Frederick Police Department for a polygraph test. His father, Ronnie Watts, flew in from North Carolina that morning and went with Chris to the police station. Chris failed the polygraph test badly. He received one of the lowest possible scores. During the interrogation that followed, investigators searched through Chris's phone records and computer records. They discovered he was having an affair with his co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. When confronted with this information, Chris finally asked to speak to his father alone. After talking with his father, Chris confessed. But he did not tell the truth. He admitted to killing Shanann, but claimed he did it because he saw her strangling their daughters through the baby monitor. He said he saw Bella sprawled on her bed in blue, and he saw Shanann strangling Celeste. He claimed he went into a rage and strangled Shanann. He said he then loaded all 3 bodies into his truck and took them to the Anadarko oil site, where he buried Shanann and put the girls in oil tanks. This story was a lie. Chris was still protecting himself, trying to make it seem like he killed his wife in a justified rage after she murdered their children. Investigators did not fully believe his story, but at least now they knew where to find the bodies. At 11:40 p.m. on August 15, Chris Watts was arrested on suspicion of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased body. On August 16, at 11 p.m., investigators arrived at the Anadarko oil site. Chris had marked the locations of the bodies on an aerial photograph. Using this information and drone searches, investigators found a bedsheet in the field near the oil tanks. The sheet matched the pattern of pillowcases and a top sheet found in the trash at the Watts home. They also found freshly disturbed earth that looked like a grave. Investigators used an excavator to carefully remove dirt from the shallow grave. They found Shanann's body curled up in the grave, exactly where Chris said she would be. She was still wearing her purple shirt, bra, and underwear. Her unborn son, Nico, died with her. Then came the horrific task of draining the oil tanks to recover the girls. The east tank, which contained Celeste's body, took 6 hours to drain. When they finally pulled Celeste out, she was still wearing her nightgown. The west tank contained Bella, also still in her nightgown. The medical examiner later performed autopsies. Shanann died from strangulation. Both Bella and Celeste died from suffocation. Oil was found in the girls' throats, stomachs, and lungs, showing they had been placed in the tanks after death. This confirmed Chris's confession that he killed them before putting them in the tanks. Investigators were completely disgusted and traumatized by what they found. CBI agent Tammy Lee later said she could not get the image of pulling those little girls out of the oil tanks out of her head. Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke said he would not wish that task upon his worst enemy. The case took a psychological toll on everyone involved in the investigation. Meanwhile, Nickel Kessinger was watching the news and saw that Shanann and the girls were missing. On August 13, Chris had texted Nickel saying his family was gone. He told her Shanann had taken the girls to a play date and they had not come back. His texts were casual and emotionless. When Nickel saw the news, she realized Chris had been lying to her. She learned that he was still married and that Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant. Nickel sent Chris several messages asking what he did and where his family was. On August 15, the same day Chris was arrested, Nickel went to the Weld County Sheriff's Office on her own. She told investigators everything about her relationship with Chris. She provided information that turned out to be crucial to the case. Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke later called the information Nickel provided a bombshell. Nickel cooperated fully with police. She told them about their affair, their dates, and everything Chris had told her. She said she legitimately thought Chris's cheese was sliding off his cracker long before she met him. She also said Chris had lied about everything, and that if he could hide something that big, what else was he lying about? On August 16, Chris appeared in Weld County District Court for a bond hearing. The judge denied bond. On August 21, Chris was formally charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, including 2 additional charges because the victims were children under 12, and he was in a position of trust. He was also charged with 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased body. For months, Chris maintained his story that Shanann killed the girls and he killed her in retaliation. Investigators did not believe this story, but they prepared for a trial. The case was getting international attention. Everyone wanted to know why a seemingly normal father would do something so horrific. On the 6th of November 2018, Chris Watts surprised everyone by pleading guilty to all 9 charges. He accepted a plea deal that removed the possibility of the death penalty. Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandra Rizuchek, did not want the death penalty. They did not want another killing, and did not want to go through years of trials and appeals. On the 19th of November 2018, Chris Watts appeared in court for sentencing. Weld County District Court Judge Marcelo Kopkow called the crimes perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen. Chris was sentenced to 5 life sentences, without the possibility of parole, 3 to be served consecutively. He received an additional 48 years for unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with the 3 bodies. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors revealed new details about the murders. They said Bella fought back as she was being smothered. She knew what was happening to her. This detail devastated everyone in the courtroom. Shanann's family gave victim impact statements while Chris kept his head down. He did not say anything in court. That same day, Shanann's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Chris Watts. On the 3rd of December 2018, just 2 weeks after his sentencing, Chris was transferred out of Colorado for safety reasons. He was moved to Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison in Waupun, Wisconsin. Prison officials were concerned about his safety in a Colorado facility due to the high-profile nature of his crimes. But Chris Watts was not done talking. On the 18th of February 2019, Chris agreed to a 5-hour interview with investigators from the FBI, CBI, and Frederick Police. This time, he told the truth. He confessed for the first time that he killed his daughters himself. Shanann did not kill them. He had made that story up to try to justify his actions. In this confession, Chris explained the horrible details of that morning. He said he woke Shanann up and they talked. When she told him he would never see the kids again after he told her about wanting a divorce, he strangled her. He said Bella came in and asked what was wrong with Mommy, and he lied and said she was sick. He admitted he put the girls in the truck while they were still alive. He said Bella complained about the smell during the drive. When they got to the oil site, he killed Celeste first while Bella watched. Then he killed Bella, who fought back and begged him to stop. Chris told investigators that Bella asked him if he was going to do to her what he did to Cece. Those words haunted the investigators who heard them. A 4-year-old girl asking her father if he was going to kill her too, knowing exactly what was about to happen. Even after this confession, Chris could not give investigators a clear answer about why he did it. He said things about wanting to start a new life. He talked about being in love with Nicole. He mentioned the financial stress, but nothing he said could explain why a father would murder his own children with his bare hands. In June 2021, more information came out through letters Chris wrote to a pen pal named Sharon Cadle. She published these letters in a book. In the letters, Chris admitted he had been planning the murders for weeks. He said on August 12, when he put Bella and Celeste to bed, he walked away and said to himself, "That's the last time I'm going to be tucking my babies in." Chris also revealed that he tried to terminate Shanann's pregnancy before he killed her. He had been giving her oxycodone, hoping it would cause her to miscarry. He said he thought it would be easier to be with Nicole if Shanann was not pregnant. Chris wrote that he tried to smother the girls in their beds at home first, but was unsuccessful. This means he attempted to kill his daughters, failed, and then tried again later at the oil site. In these letters and other communications from prison, Chris tried to blame Nicole for his actions. He referred to her as Jezebel, which in Christian religion is a term for an immoral woman who deceives people. He wrote that he was in love with 2 women at the same time, and that this is what led to what happened. He claimed Nicole was of evil spirits like Jezebel. He wrote that the words of a harlot brought him low, and that her flattering speech was like drops of honey that pierced his heart and soul. This was Chris trying to shift responsibility away from himself. He was trying to make it seem like Nicole seduced him and led him to commit murder. But the courts did not agree with this theory at all. Chris Watts alone made the decision to kill his family. He planned it, he carried it out, and he tried to cover it up. Nicole Kessinger has never been charged with any crime or suspected of any wrongdoing in connection with the murders. After giving her statements to police, she disappeared from public view. According to reports, she changed her name and possibly entered witness protection due to harassment and threats she received online. She has not spoken publicly about the case since her November 2018 interview with the Denver Post. In that interview, she said she had no idea Chris was capable of killing his family and that he lied about everything. The case has been featured in numerous documentaries and films. On the 7th of December 2019, Oxygen released a documentary called Criminal Confessions that focused on the investigation. On the 26th of January 2020, Lifetime released a movie called Chris Watts, Confessions of a Killer. Shanann's family spoke out against this Lifetime movie, saying they were not consulted about it and were not aware it was being made until it was already in production. They said the film was inaccurate and feared it would increase the online harassment they had been receiving. On the 30th of September 2020, Netflix released American Murder: The Family Next Door. This documentary used actual footage, including home videos, social media posts, text messages, body camera footage from police, and interrogation room recordings. The documentary told the story mostly through Shanann's own words and showed the progression of their relationship from happy to troubled. The documentary was watched by millions of people around the world and brought renewed attention to the case. After the Netflix documentary was released, reports came out that Chris Watts received a surge of letters from women. According to sources who spoke to People magazine, many of these women thought Chris was handsome and felt compassion for him. Some wrote him love letters. Some sent photos of themselves, including bikini shots. This disturbed many people who could not understand why anyone would want to have a romantic relationship with a man who murdered his own children. Chris spends his days at Dodge Correctional Institution working as a custodian. He largely keeps to himself. He has reportedly found religion in prison and spends time reading the Bible and praying. His parents, Ronnie and Cindy Watts, have said they still love their son despite his actions. They speak with him regularly. His mother, Cindy, said not a day goes by without her thinking about what her son did to her daughter-in-law and grandchildren. She said it is something that stays with you and she will never get over it. Chris's father, Ronnie, told reporters that Chris is heartbroken and has turned to religion for comfort. But many people question how genuine this religious conversion is. A man who could murder his own daughters with his bare hands while they begged for their lives does not seem capable of true remorse or redemption to many observers. Shanann's family has tried to move forward while keeping the memory of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico alive. On the 1st of September 2018, hundreds of mourners gathered for a funeral service at Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Thousands more watched a Facebook live stream of the 90-minute service. Chris Watts was never mentioned during the funeral. Shanann's family has worked hard to honor the victims and educate people about domestic violence. They have spoken about the warning signs they missed and encouraged others to pay attention when someone they love seems to be in trouble. Shanann's father, Frank Razuchek, returned to Colorado in July 2019 to plead with online bullies to stop harassing his family. The harassment has been relentless. Some people on the internet have blamed Shanann for her own death, claiming she was controlling or nagging. These cruel conspiracy theories have added another layer of pain to an already unbearable tragedy. The family was awarded their son-in-law's home in the wrongful death lawsuit. The house on Saratoga Trail, where the murders took place, was later sold at auction in 2019. The family also took custody of Dieter, the family dog, who had been left alone in the house during those terrible days in August 2018. The Watts family murders sent shockwaves through the community of Frederick and beyond. Neighbors placed flowers and memorials outside the home. People struggled to understand how this could happen to a family that seemed so perfect from the outside. It forced many people to recognize that you never really know what is happening behind closed doors. The case has been studied by criminal psychologists and experts in domestic violence. Former FBI profiler Candice DeLong has spoken about how family annihilators like Chris Watts are rare because they usually commit suicide after killing their families. Chris did not do this. Instead, he tried to start a new life and acted like nothing happened. He went on television and begged for his family to come home while knowing they were dead and he had killed them. Experts have also pointed out that cases of family annihilation often happen in August, before school starts. This timing may delay detection and investigation because it is not unusual for families to be away on vacation or visiting relatives during this time. In the Watts case, Chris might have been able to delay discovery longer if Nicole Atkinson had not been so persistent in checking on her friend. The Chris Watts case has become one of the most studied and discussed murder cases in recent American history. It has been the subject of countless true crime podcasts, YouTube videos, and online discussions. People are fascinated and horrified by the question of how a seemingly normal father could do something so monstrous. Some experts believe Chris Watts is a psychopath or sociopath who lacks empathy and remorse. Others believe he is simply a weak man who wanted an easy way out of his problems and chose murder instead of divorce. Some think the affair with Nicole pushed him over the edge. Others point to the financial stress the family was under. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case is that there may be no satisfying explanation. Chris Watts himself has not been able to articulate why he did what he did. He has given different reasons at different times. He has tried to blame Shanann. He has tried to blame Nicole. He has mentioned financial stress and wanting to start over. But none of these reasons come close to explaining how a father could murder his 4-year-old daughter while she begged him not to. Investigators who worked on the case have said they will never be the same. Steve Wren, the chief deputy of the Weld County District Attorney's Office, said it was too strange and too baffling not to leave a lasting impact on how you think about human behavior. These investigators spent months going through Chris Watts's lies, examining evidence, and trying to understand the mind of a family annihilator. What they found was a man who seemed completely ordinary on the outside but was capable of unimaginable evil. The Watts case has also raised important questions about social media and the pressure to present a perfect life online. Shanann's Facebook posts showed a happy family, a loving marriage, and beautiful children. But behind those posts was a marriage falling apart, financial struggles, and a husband who was planning to murder his entire family. The contrast between the social media image and the reality was stark and disturbing. Some people have criticized Shanann for oversharing on social media or for being involved in a multi-level marketing company. These criticisms are cruel and misguided. Shanann Watts was a loving mother who was trying to save her marriage and provide for her family. She did nothing to deserve what happened to her. She did not cause her husband to become a murderer. The responsibility for these murders lies entirely with Chris Watts. Today, Chris Watts sits in his prison cell in Wisconsin, where he will spend the rest of his life. He has photos of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste in his cell. He claims to look at them and feel remorse. He says he keeps them there as a reminder of what he did and what he lost. But for many people, this seems like another manipulation. A man who could kill his daughters while they watched him kill their sister and begged for mercy does not seem capable of genuine love or remorse. Shanann Watts was 34 years old when she died. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a son she planned to name Nico Lee. Bella Marie Watts was 4 years old. Celeste Catherine Watts was 3 years old. These 3 people, plus the unborn baby Nico, are the victims of this case. Their lives were cut short by someone who was supposed to love and protect them more than anyone else in the world. The case reminds us that domestic violence and family annihilation can happen in any community, in any family, regardless of how perfect things look from the outside. It reminds us to pay attention to warning signs and to take threats seriously. It reminds us that the most dangerous time for victims of domestic violence is often when they try to leave, or when the abuser feels they are losing control. The Chris Watts case will be remembered as one of the most shocking family murders in modern American history. It is a case that defies easy explanation and challenges our understanding of human nature. How could a father do this to his own children? How could someone lie so easily and convincingly? How could anyone murder a 4-year-old girl who was begging for her life? These are questions that may never have satisfying answers. What we do know is that on the 13th of August 2018, Christopher Lee Watts made a choice. He chose to strangle his wife while she slept in their bed. He chose to put his daughters in his truck, knowing what he was going to do to them. He chose to smother them one by one. He chose to stuff their little bodies into oil tanks, and he chose to go home and act like everything was normal. For those choices, Chris Watts will spend every day for the rest of his life in prison. He will never be free. He will never have another relationship. He will never tuck another child into bed. He will never experience joy or happiness or love. He will grow old and die in a prison cell, and that is exactly what he deserves. But the real tragedy is not what happened to Chris Watts. The real tragedy is what happened to Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. They are the ones who lost everything. They are the ones who deserve to live full lives. Bella would be 11 years old now, Celeste would be 9, Nico would be 6, Shanann would be 40. But they never got the chance to grow up, to experience life, to love and be loved, because Chris Watts took that away from them. The Frederick community has not forgotten. Every year on August 13, people remember the Watts family. Flowers are left, prayers are said. Stories are shared about Shanann's love for her children, Bella's sweet personality, and Celeste's beautiful smile. These memories keep them alive in the hearts of those who loved them and those who were touched by their story. Chris Watts destroyed his family, but he could not destroy their memory. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico Watts will be remembered not for how they died, but for how they lived and how much they were loved. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Susan Smith, 1994, The Carjacking Lie. Susan Smith, 1994, The Carjacking Lie. Susan Lee Vaughn was born on the 26th of September 1971 in Union, South Carolina. She was the youngest of 3 children and the only daughter. Her parents were Linda and Harry Vaughn. From the outside, the family seemed normal. Harry worked as a fireman and mill worker, while Linda worked as a secretary. But behind closed doors, the marriage was falling apart. When Susan was 7 years old, her parents divorced. The split hit the family hard. 5 weeks after the divorce papers were signed, Harry Vaughn made a decision that would haunt his daughter forever. At age 37, he committed suicide with a shotgun blast to his chest. The loss devastated young Susan. She kept her father's coin collection and an audio recording of his voice, playing it over and over to hear him again. The grief changed Susan. Friends and family noticed she became distant and sad. Where there was once a happy child, there was now an empty shell. She carried the weight of her father's death everywhere she went. At age 13, Susan tried to follow in her father's footsteps. She swallowed a bottle of aspirin in her first suicide attempt. She survived, but the pain inside her remained. After Harry's death, Linda needed to move on. The next year, she married Beverly Russell Jr., a stockbroker who seemed like a good catch. He was a divorced father of 3 and a prominent figure in Union. Russell owned a successful business and was active in South Carolina's Republican Party and the Christian Coalition. He sang in the church choir. To the outside world, the Russell family looked perfect, but the truth was much darker. When Susan turned 15, Beverly Russell began sexually abusing her. He would fondle her breasts and genitals. The abuse continued in secret until Susan couldn't take it anymore. In 1987, when she was 16, Susan told her high school guidance counselor what was happening. The counselor reported it to the local Department of Social Services, who then notified the Union Sheriff's Office. Linda confronted her husband about the allegations. Russell admitted to the abuse. He promised to stop and agreed to family therapy. The family chose not to press charges. Russell was too powerful, too connected. He was Beverly Russell, the respected Republican, the Christian Coalition member, the church choir singer. So the case was sealed, and everyone pretended it never happened. But Russell didn't stop. The abuse continued. In February 1988, Susan revealed that her stepfather was still molesting her. Again, no charges were filed. The pattern of abuse had taught Susan a terrible lesson. She was powerless, and no one would save her. The adults in her life had failed her. The system had failed her. She was trapped in a house with a man who was supposed to protect her, but instead preyed on her. The trauma piled up. At 18, Susan tried to kill herself again. She was working part-time at a Winn-Dixie supermarket when she started an affair with an older, married co-worker. When he ended the relationship, Susan swallowed an overdose of aspirin. Doctors diagnosed her with an adjustment disorder and blamed stress. They missed the deeper issues: the childhood sexual abuse, the unresolved grief over her father's suicide, the 2 previous suicide attempts. Susan was drowning, and no one threw her a lifeline. In 1989, Susan graduated from high school. She was working at Winn-Dixie when she met David Smith, a fellow employee. David was raised as a Jehovah's Witness by strict parents. He was drawn to Susan's energy and what he later called her $1,000,000 smile. They dated for about a year before getting married. The wedding ceremony was marked by tragedy on both sides. 11 days before they exchanged vows, David's brother Danny died of Crohn's disease. Within a few months of the wedding, David's father attempted suicide. Both Susan and David came from families damaged by loss and pain. Perhaps they saw in each other a chance to build something better. Susan was 19 when she married David in March 1991. She was also 2 months pregnant. David was 20. They were both young, both from broken homes, both looking for stability. On the 10th of October 1991, their first son, Michael Daniel Smith, was born. The baby brought joy, but the marriage was already showing cracks. The couple moved into David's family home, but his mother soon left town, unable to cope with her own losses. Susan and David were on their own, raising a baby with limited resources and even less emotional maturity. Their relationship became a cycle of fighting, accusations of cheating, and temporary separations followed by reconciliations. Friends described them as immature and volatile. Susan would storm into Winn-Dixie, yelling at David in front of customers and employees, accusing him of sleeping with other women. A week later, she would be back, smiling and acting like nothing had happened. They both had affairs. Neither seemed capable of staying faithful or letting go. It was a toxic pattern that would repeat throughout their marriage. On the 5th of August, 1993, their second son was born, Alexander Tyler Smith, called Alex. He was 14 months younger than Michael. The boys gave Susan something she desperately needed: unconditional love. They depended on her. They looked at her with trust and affection. For a woman who had felt abandoned and abused her whole life, her sons represented everything good. But the marriage continued to fall apart. David and Susan separated multiple times. In September 1994, Susan filed for divorce. They were living apart but still saw each other regularly. The relationship was over, but neither of them could quite let go. In 1993, Susan got a new job as a secretary at Conso Products, the largest employer in Union. The company manufactured decorative trim for furniture and curtains. Their products were so high-end that they adorned furniture in Buckingham Palace. For Susan, working at Conso felt like a step up from Winn-Dixie. The job had, as she told a friend, a future. At Conso, Susan met Tom Findley, the 7-year-old son of the company's owner, J. Carey Findley. Tom headed the graphic design division. He was good-looking, educated, and came from money. The secretaries at Conso called him the Catch. Tom represented everything Susan wanted: stability, wealth, and escape from her troubled life. Susan and Tom started dating in January 1994. They slept together around 10 times over the next few months. Tom was drawn to Susan's warmth and energy, but he had reservations. Susan had 2 young children, and Tom wasn't interested in becoming a stepfather. He also came from a wealthy family, while Susan was a mill worker's daughter. The class difference bothered him. They broke up in March or April when David discovered the affair. But Susan and Tom got back together in September after Susan told Tom she was filing for divorce. For a few weeks, Susan believed she had found her way out. Tom Findley could give her the life she wanted. She could leave behind the trailer park existence, the failed marriage, the painful memories. But Tom had other ideas. On the 17th of October 1994, he typed out a 2-page letter on his computer. The letter was a mixture of praise and rejection. Tom wrote that Susan was intelligent, beautiful, sensitive, and understanding. He wrote that he could really fall for her, but then came the words that would seal the fate of 2 innocent children. Tom wrote that there were some things about Susan that were not suited for him. And yes, he was speaking about her children. He made clear that her kids might be good kids, but it would not matter how good they were. The fact was simple. He just did not want children. Tom gave Susan the letter on October 18. He encouraged her to continue her education and told her that she needed to find herself before settling down with anyone. He wasn't trying to be cruel. From his perspective, he was being honest. He didn't want the responsibility of raising another man's children. He wanted Susan to know the truth so she could move on. But for Susan, the letter was devastating. She was 23 years old, estranged from her husband, working a low-paying job, raising 2 children mostly on her own, and now the man she thought could save her was walking away. Tom represented her escape, and he had just closed the door. The rejection triggered every abandonment Susan had ever experienced. Her father's suicide, her mother's failure to protect her from Russell, the failed marriage to David, the string of broken relationships. Over the next week, Susan spiraled. She saw Tom 3 times on the 25th of October 1994, the day everything came crashing down. The first time was at work. She was crying and very upset. She told Tom about her sexual relationship with Beverly Russell. She also confessed to having an affair with Tom's father, Carey Findley. Tom was shocked and disturbed. He told Susan that the intimate part of their relationship had to end. Later that day, Susan came to Tom's office. She returned an Auburn University sweatshirt that belonged to him. She told him she was going to give him the sweatshirt because she might not see him again. Tom found her words alarming. He told her to keep the sweatshirt. He thought Susan might be suicidal. What he didn't know was that Susan had already made a terrible decision. That evening, Susan attended her British literature class at the University of South Carolina's Union campus. After class, around 8 p.m., she and a girlfriend went to Hickory Nuts, a sports bar that Tom Findlay frequented. Tom was there, sitting at the bar with friends. When Tom heard Susan order a beer, he paid for it and bought a round for everyone. It was a kind gesture, but to Susan, it must have felt like salt in a wound. Tom was being friendly, but he didn't want her. After a second beer, Susan left the bar. She went home and picked up her sons from daycare. Michael was 3 years old, full of energy and personality. He loved riding on the lawnmower with his father, cutting grass. He would always fall asleep during the rides. Alex was 14 months old, still a baby, still learning to walk and talk. Both boys were strapped into their car seats. Susan was wearing the auburn sweatshirt Tom had tried to give back to her. What happened next would shock the nation and haunt Union, South Carolina, forever. Susan drove her 1,990 burgundy Mazda Protege through the dark streets of Union. In the trunk of her car, she had placed her wedding dress and wedding album. Everything that symbolized her old life was in that car. Susan drove to John D. Long Lake, a quiet spot just outside of town. It was around 9 p.m. There was no moon out, and the area was pitch black. Susan pulled up to the boat ramp. This was the moment when she could have stopped. She could have turned around. She could have driven home. She could have called someone for help. Instead, Susan got out of the car. Michael and Alex were still strapped in their car seats in the back. Susan released the emergency brake. The car began to roll down the ramp. Susan stood and watched as her Mazda slowly entered the water. The car floated for a moment, then began to sink. Later, investigators would reconstruct what happened inside the car. It took 6 minutes for the water to fill the vehicle completely. 6 minutes for the water to rise around the boys' legs, then their chests, then their necks. 6 minutes of terror for 2 children who didn't understand what was happening. Michael and Alex were too young to unbuckle themselves. They were trapped in their car seats. They couldn't escape. The water rose over their heads, and they drowned. The car came to rest 122 feet from shore at the bottom of John D. Long Lake. Inside were the bodies of Michael and Alex Smith, still strapped in their car seats. In the trunk were Susan's wedding dress and photo album. Susan's entire life was in that car, except for the one person who had stood beside her through the 9-day lie that was about to begin, her husband David. Susan ran from the boat ramp to a nearby house. She pounded on the door of the McLeod family's home, about a quarter mile from the lake. When they opened the door, Susan was crying and hysterical. She screamed for help, claiming a man had her kids and her car. She said a black man had her kids and her car. Susan told the McLeod family that she had been carjacked. She said she was stopped at a red light at Monarch Mills when a black man with a gun got into her car. He put the gun to her side and told her to shut up and drive. She said he made her drive about 5 miles down Highway 49, then told her to stop and get out. When she begged him to let her take her sons, he said he didn't have time and promised he wouldn't hurt them. Then, she claimed, he pushed her out of the car and drove off with Michael and Alex still in the back seat. The McLeods called Susan's mother. Within hours, law enforcement had descended on Union. A massive search began for a burgundy Mazda Protege with 2 small children inside. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED, flew helicopters over John D. Long Lake and nearby Sumter National Forest, using heat sensors to try to locate the car. Police dogs searched the area. Divers checked the lake but didn't find anything. The search focused on the shallows, within 30 feet of shore. No one thought to search deeper. Susan worked with a sketch artist to create a composite of the supposed carjacker. She described him as approximately 40 years old, black, wearing a plaid jacket, dark shirt, jeans, and a dark toboggan hat. She said he had bad body odor and seemed nervous. The sketch was posted in storefronts all over Union and distributed nationwide. For 9 days, Susan Smith played the role of a grieving mother. She stood beside her estranged husband David at press conferences, pleading for the safe return of their sons. Susan said tearfully on national television to please bring them home. She could not express how much they were wanted back home, how much they loved them and missed them. David believed her. The entire nation believed her. Yellow ribbons were tied to trees on Main Street in Union. Hundreds of tips poured into the sheriff's office from across the country. Every burgundy car with 2 children inside was investigated. Every report of a suspicious black man was followed up. The Adam Walsh Foundation, an organization that helped find missing children, got involved. Vigils were held, prayers were offered. The country was united in hoping for Michael and Alex's safe return. But from the very beginning, investigators had doubts. On October 26, the second day of the search, law enforcement officials suspected Susan knew where her children were. They hoped the boys were still alive, but something about Susan's story didn't add up. Sheriff Howard Wells and SLED agents questioned Susan repeatedly. They asked her to take a polygraph test. The results were inconclusive, but they showed signs of deception. Susan's behavior also raised red flags. Friends noticed she kept asking if Tom Findlay was coming to see her. For a woman whose children were missing, she seemed strangely focused on her ex-boyfriend. The breakthrough came when investigators examined Susan's description of the carjacking location. Susan claimed she had been stopped at a red light at the Monarch Mills intersection when the carjacker got into her car. But there was a problem with her story. Traffic engineers examined the signal and determined that the light would not have turned red unless another vehicle was present at the intersection. Susan had claimed she was alone at an empty intersection. The light wouldn't have changed for her. As the days passed, the pressure on Susan intensified. The media attention was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside her home. Cameras followed her everywhere. She was living under a microscope, and the weight of her lie was crushing her. She had expected the car to be found quickly in the lake. She never anticipated that the search would drag on for days while the entire country watched and waited. By November 3, 9 days after the murders, Susan couldn't take it anymore. SLED agents brought her to a local church for another round of questioning. Agent David Caldwell confronted her with the inconsistencies in her story. He told her she could not have it both ways. She was either a victim or a suspect. He believed that was why she killed them. Susan left the room, shouting that she could not believe they thought she did it. But the walls were closing in. Later that day, at the church, Susan broke down. At 5:05 p.m., she signed a handwritten confession. Susan wrote that because of her romantic and financial situation, she had never been so low. She wrote that she was in love with someone very much, but he did not love her and never would. She wrote that she did not want her children to grow up without a mother. She wrote that she dropped to the lowest point when she allowed her children to go down that ramp into the water without her. That evening, Union County Sheriff Howard Wells held a press conference that would stun the nation. Wells stood before a room packed with reporters and townspeople. His voice was heavy with emotion as he announced that Susan Smith had been arrested and would be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, 3-year-old Michael and 1 4-month-old Alexander. Gasps filled the room. People could not believe what they were hearing. The grieving mother they had all been praying for was actually a killer. Immediately after Susan confessed, divers from the Department of Natural Resources went back to John D. Long Lake. This time, they knew exactly where to look. They went beyond the 30-foot perimeter they had searched before. At 122 feet from shore, they found Susan's burgundy Mazda resting on the bottom of the lake. The car had nosedived into the mud. Inside, still strapped in their car seats, were the bodies of Michael and Alex Smith. Their heads were hanging downward. 9 days underwater had taken a terrible toll on the small bodies. Steve Morrow, a diver for the South Carolina Wildlife Department, was one of the men who found the boys. He would later testify about what he saw that night. He shined his flashlight through the murky water into the submerged vehicle. The first thing he saw was a small hand against the glass. The image would haunt him for the rest of his life. Grown men and women in law enforcement stood on the shore and cried as the car was lifted from the lake. The betrayal was worse than if there had been a real carjacker. Prosecutor Tommy Pope later said, "People had been so drawn in to help, so invested in finding those boys, and Susan had lied to them all." The racial component of Susan's lie added another layer of pain and anger. Susan had described the fictional carjacker as a black man, complete with details about his appearance and body odor. Her false accusation had put innocent black men across the country at risk. Every black man driving a burgundy car became a suspect. Police departments received countless tips about black men who fit Susan's description. The lie tapped into ugly racial stereotypes and fears. For black residents of Union, the accusation was both hurtful and dangerous. As one black mayor in the region later pointed out, why would any black man want to carjack a car and take 2 white children? What purpose would that serve? The accusation made no sense, but it had power because of the racial fears it exploited. On the 6th of November 1994, 3 days after Susan's confession, hundreds of mourners gathered for the wake and funeral service for Michael and Alex. The 2 boys were placed together in a single casket. David Smith, barely able to stand, wept as he said goodbye to his sons. He had lost everything. His children were dead, and his wife was their killer. The small community of Union came together to mourn, but the grief was mixed with anger, confusion, and a sense of betrayal. Susan Smith was held in isolation at the Union County Jail on suicide watch. The woman who had tried to kill herself 3 times before now had plenty of reasons to try again. On the 12th of December, 1994, a grand jury indicted Susan on 2 counts of murder for the deaths of Michael and Alex. In January 1995, 16th Circuit Solicitor Tommy Pope announced that he would seek the death penalty. South Carolina had the electric chair, and Pope believed Susan deserved it. The trial began on the 10th of July 1995, less than 9 months after the murders. Jury selection took several days. The final jury consisted of 9 men and 3 women, all from Union County. The trial would become a media sensation, with cameras in the courtroom broadcasting the proceedings to a nation still captivated by the case. Tommy Pope, who was 32 years old and relatively early in his career, led the prosecution. He argued that Susan had killed her sons deliberately and coldly to remove them as obstacles to her relationship with Tom Findlay. Pope produced as evidence the letter from Tom that had been recovered from Susan's submerged car. The letter made clear that Tom did not want children. The prosecution's theory was simple. Susan wanted Tom. Tom did not want her children, so Susan got rid of her children. The prosecution called several key witnesses. Tom Findlay took the stand and described his relationship with Susan. He read from the letter he had written her. He testified that Susan had been distraught when he ended their relationship, and he had been concerned she might be suicidal. But Tom also spoke compassionately about Susan, describing her as very caring, very loving, and a good friend. The jury heard from investigators who described how they had caught Susan in her lies. They presented evidence about the traffic light that would not have turned red for Susan if she were alone at the intersection. They played video of a reconstruction showing how the car sank into the lake. The video demonstrated that it took 6 minutes for the car to fill with water and sink. 6 minutes during which Susan could have stopped what was happening. 6 minutes during which she chose to walk away instead. One of the most emotional moments in the trial came when Steve Morrow, the diver who found the boys, testified. His voice cracked as he described seeing that small hand pressed against the window. He described the boys' heads hanging downward in their car seats. The image was too much for many in the courtroom. Jurors took notes, and some wept quietly. David Smith also testified during the penalty phase. He had to be led to the witness stand by his father because he was so emotionally drained. David told the jury about his sons. He talked about how Michael loved to ride on the lawnmower with him. He talked about giving the boys baths and watching them play. He talked about how Susan's actions had destroyed his life that night. After about 2 hours of testimony, David collapsed into his father's arms during a lunch break. The defense chose not to cross-examine him out of respect, at Susan's request. The defense team, led by David Bruck and Judy Clark, took a different approach. These were high-profile attorneys who would later defend notorious criminals like Unabomber Ted Kaczynski and Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Their strategy was to paint Susan as a deeply troubled woman whose actions were the result of mental illness, not evil. Clark told the jury in her opening statement that this was a case about despair and sadness. The defense called expert witnesses to testify about Susan's mental health. Psychiatrists diagnosed her with dependent personality disorder and major depression. They explained how childhood sexual abuse, if not properly treated, could have severe effects in later life. They described Susan's history of suicide attempts and her fragile emotional state. The defense argued that Susan had driven to John D. Long Lake, intending to kill herself along with her children, but at the last moment, her body willed itself out of the car. She couldn't go through with her own death, but by then, it was too late to save the boys. A social worker, Jenny Ward, testified about investigating the sexual abuse allegations against Beverly Russell when Susan was 15. Ward explained that Russell had admitted to molesting Susan. Ward had wanted to press charges, but the family refused. Ward testified that the abuse was criminal and it should have been prosecuted. The child said it happened. The perpetrator admitted it, but nothing was done. The defense argued that this failure had contributed to Susan's psychological problems. Beverly Russell himself took the stand during the penalty phase. He admitted to molesting his stepdaughter. He spoke about his regret and his ongoing relationship with Susan. Russell revealed that their sexual relationship had continued until just 6 months before the murders. This revelation shocked many in the courtroom. Susan had been married with children, and her stepfather was still abusing her. The defense argued that Susan's entire life had been shaped by trauma and abuse, and her mental state on the 25th of October 1994 was the result of years of accumulated damage. Susan's brother, Scotty Vaughn, also testified on her behalf. He was 33 years old and worked in a textile mill. Tearfully, he read from a letter he had written to Susan in jail. He had told her about their father's suicide, explaining that in his last moments, their father had regretted giving up. Scotty pleaded with Susan not to give up, to remember that he and God loved her. Scotty asked the jury to spare his sister's life. The prosecution's rebuttal was fierce. Tommy Pope argued that Susan had made a choice on the night of October 25. It was a horrible choice, but it was her choice. She had chosen the love of a man over the love of her sons. Pope told the jury that when Susan released the emergency brake, it was like pulling a trigger. The intent was formed when she let the car roll down the ramp and into the lake. Pope asked the jury to imagine what those final 6 minutes were like for Michael and Alex. He argued that the children must have been screaming and yelling, calling for their father while Susan ran up the hill away from them. If she truly wanted to stop their deaths, Pope said, she could have pulled the emergency brake back up. She could have jumped into the water. She could have done something. Instead, she chose to walk away and let them drown. The jury deliberated for only 2.5 hours before returning a verdict. On the 22nd of July 1995, they found Susan Smith guilty on 2 counts of murder. The conviction was swift and unanimous. But the real question was the sentence. Would Susan Smith be sent to the electric chair, or would she spend the rest of her life in prison? During the penalty phase, the jury had to decide between death and life imprisonment. Under South Carolina law at the time, the jury was not told that Susan would be eligible for parole after 30 years if they chose life. The jurors truly believed, as Pope later said, that a life sentence meant Susan would spend the rest of her days in prison. This was important because many jurors felt conflicted about sending a woman to death, especially one with such a troubled background. The jury voted 11 to 1 in favor of life imprisonment when deliberations began. The lone holdout for the death penalty eventually joined the majority. The jury decided that while Susan Smith was a killer, she was also a victim. Her descent into murder had been shaped by childhood trauma, sexual abuse, untreated mental illness, and a series of failures by the adults who should have protected her. One juror, Deborah Benvenuti, later said they all felt Susan was a really disturbed person. On the 28th of July, 1995, the jury announced their decision. Susan Smith was sentenced to 2 concurrent life terms in prison for the murders of Michael and Alexander Smith. She would serve her time at the Camille Griffin Graham Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina, in the Administrative Segregation Unit. Pope accepted the jury's decision, though he considered the case a failure on his part. He had sought the death penalty and had not gotten it. Susan began serving her sentence in July 1995. She was 23 years old. Under South Carolina law, she would be eligible for parole after serving 30 years, which would be in 2024. At the time, neither the jury nor the public realized she would have a chance at freedom after 3 decades. Prison life was difficult for Susan. She was one of the most hated women in America. Her crime had captivated the nation, and few had sympathy for a mother who drowned her own children. Susan was kept in isolation for her own protection. Other inmates had threatened her. Guards had to be vigilant to prevent attacks. But Susan's behavior in prison soon added more scandal to her story. In 1997, less than 2 years into her sentence, Susan was caught with a razor blade. This was her first disciplinary action. Then came revelations that would shock the public once again. Susan admitted to having a sexual relationship with one of her prison guards. The guard's name was Alfred Rowe. He later testified that Susan had seduced him. They had 4 sexual encounters before the relationship was discovered. Rowe was fired and charged. He received 5 years of probation. He later spoke publicly about his relationship with Susan, telling media outlets that she was manipulative and seductive. He said that Susan could be your best friend if she wanted something from you. He also said she was not ready to rejoin society and be a law-abiding citizen. But Susan's pattern of inappropriate relationships with guards did not end there. Court records show that she had a sexual encounter with a second prison guard during her time behind bars. This guard was also fired and charged. He went to prison for 3 months. The incidents led prison officials to transfer Susan multiple times through the South Carolina prison system. She was eventually moved to the Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood County in September 2020. Susan's disciplinary record in prison continued to grow. She received at least 7 disciplinary sanctions over the years. In 2010, she was disciplined for drug use. She was caught again with drugs a month later. That same year, she was also disciplined for mutilation, which means she did something that scarred or damaged her body, possibly self-harm. In 2012, she was disciplined for unauthorized use of another inmate's pin. More recently, she was sanctioned for speaking with a documentarian and providing contact information for victims, including David Smith. The documentarian had also deposited money into Susan's account, which violated prison rules. In 2010, Susan filed a handwritten request for a new trial. She claimed that her attorney had poorly represented her in 1995 and that the trial had been unfair. A judge rejected her request. Susan continued to maintain her version of events, sometimes shifting between claiming the murders were an accident and claiming they were a botched suicide attempt. In a 2015 letter to the state newspaper in South Carolina, Susan wrote that she was not in her right mind the night she killed Michael and Alexander. David Smith, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild his life. He had lost his sons and his marriage in one terrible act. He later remarried and started a new family, but the pain of losing Michael and Alex never went away. David kept photos and home videos of his boys. He watched them grow up in his memories. He attended therapy and found some measure of peace, but he never forgave Susan. In Union, South Carolina, memorials were placed at John D. Long Lake for Michael and Alex. The site became a place of pilgrimage for people across the country, but in 1996, tragedy struck the lake again in an eerie echo of the original crime. A family visiting the memorial site had their vehicle roll into the lake, drowning 7 people, including 4 children. The accident was ruled a terrible coincidence, but it added to the sense that John D. Long Lake was cursed. As November 2024 approached, Susan Smith became eligible for parole after serving 30 years in prison. South Carolina rarely grants parole to violent offenders. Statistics show that only 6% of parole requests are approved, but Susan was entitled to a hearing. The parole board consisted of 7 members representing different areas of the state, though 1 seat had been vacant since 2022. Susan needed 4 out of 6 votes to be granted parole. David Smith prepared to face his ex-wife at the parole hearing. He was determined to keep her in prison. He brought with him 14 other witnesses who opposed Susan's release. They included law enforcement officials, prosecutors, and community members. David told reporters that he was there to advocate for his slain children. He said Susan had made a choice that night 30 years ago. It was not a tragic mistake or something she did not mean to do. She purposefully ended their lives. On the 20th of November 2024, Susan Smith appeared before the South Carolina Parole Board via video. She was 53 years old. She had spent more than half her life in prison. During the hearing, Susan told the board that she wished she could take it back. She said she loved Michael and Alex. Her attorney, Tommy A. Thomas, described her as truly remorseful. But the witnesses who spoke against her release painted a different picture. Current 16th Circuit Solicitor Kevin Brackett pointed to the wide impact of Susan's crime and her lie about a black man kidnapping her sons. He said it traumatized Union. It traumatized South Carolina, and the entire country was in the grips of her lie and treachery. David Smith spoke powerfully about his opposition to Susan's parole. He said he had never seen true remorse from his 53-year-old ex-wife. He said he believed she should never go free. Susan's actions that night had changed his life forever. David made clear that he would return to every parole hearing, every 2 years, for the rest of his life if necessary, to ensure Susan stayed behind bars. The parole board deliberated and voted. The decision was unanimous. Susan Smith's parole was denied. She would remain in prison. Under South Carolina law, violent offenders who are denied parole can apply again after 2 years. That means Susan Smith will be eligible for another parole hearing in November 2026, when she will be 55 years old. The denial brought relief to David Smith and the many people who believed Susan should spend the rest of her life in prison for her crimes. But it also meant that every 2 years, David would have to relive the trauma of the 25th of October, 1994. He would have to stand before a parole board and argue why the woman who killed his sons should not go free. 30 years after the murders, the case of Susan Smith still resonates. It remains one of the most infamous crimes in American history. A story of betrayal, lies, mental illness, childhood trauma, and the murder of 2 innocent children. Michael Daniel Smith and Alexander Tyler Smith never got to grow up. Michael never got to ride on another lawnmower with his father. Alex never got to take his first steps or say his first words. Their lives were cut short by the one person who was supposed to protect them above all others, their mother. Susan Smith sits in her cell at the Leith Correctional Institution, serving 2 life sentences. She has spent 30 years behind bars. She may spend 30 more or even the rest of her life. The question of whether she truly feels remorse or whether she is simply a master manipulator continues to divide people. What is certain is that on the night of the 25th of October 1994, Susan Smith made a choice that destroyed multiple lives, not just those of her 2 young sons. She destroyed her own life, her husband's life, and left a scar on the community of Union, South Carolina, that has never fully healed. The lake at John D. Long still holds the memory of that terrible night. The boat ramp where Susan released her car into the water remains a place where people come to remember Michael and Alex. The memorials stand as a reminder of 2 young lives lost too soon, victims of a mother's desperate and deadly decision, victims of a tragedy that should never have happened. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to John Emile List, 1971, the Westfield Family Massacre. John Emile List, 1971, the Westfield Family Massacre. John Emile List was born on the 17th of September, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan. He came into the world as an only child to parents who were already older than most new mothers and fathers. His father, John Frederick List, was 64 years old when his son was born. His mother, Alma Maria Barbara Florence List, was 38. They had been married for just 1 year. Both came from German immigrant families and were devout members of the German Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. Religion would be the cornerstone of their son's entire life, shaping every decision he made, including the ones that would eventually destroy his family. The List family lived in a Victorian house on Winona Street on the west side of Bay City. Money was tight. They rented out the upstairs apartment to make ends meet. Young John slept in the parlor downstairs, which meant he had no privacy and no space to call his own. He learned early to be neat and tidy, to always put his things away so they would not clutter the shared living space. He learned to blend into the background, to be seen but not heard, to take up as little room as possible in the world. John's father ran a small grocery store on Salzburg Avenue, but he was not a warm or affectionate man. Family members and neighbors described John Frederick List as distant, cold, and difficult. People called him the neighborhood crank. He had little patience for children, which was unfortunate considering he had a son. John Frederick dealt with his son only through his wife, referring to the boy simply as the boy, rather than using his name. He never played with his son, never taught him how to throw a ball or ride a bike, never offered words of encouragement or praise. For young John, his father was a figure who existed in the house but remained forever out of reach. Alma List became everything to her son. She was fiercely protective, almost smotheringly so. She kept John close, perhaps too close. She made him her whole world, and in doing so, she taught him that the world outside was dangerous and frightening. Alma did not allow John to leave the neighborhood without permission. She monitored his friendships and decided which children were worthy of her son's time. She brought him into her social life, which centered entirely around the Lutheran Church. John spent hours studying the Bible with his mother. He attended Sunday school every week. The church became his second home, and God became the most important relationship in his life. As a child, John List had no friends. He was isolated, trapped in a small world controlled by an overprotective mother and an indifferent father. Other children sensed something different about him. He was too serious, too rigid, too controlled. He followed rules to the letter and expected others to do the same. When he reached high school, John tried to push back against his mother's control. He made a few friends, though never many. He excelled academically and was an honor roll student. He was named secretary of the school stamp club, but he never had a girlfriend. He never went to parties or dances. He remained on the outside looking in, watching other teenagers live normal lives, while he remained bound by rules that made no sense to anyone but his mother. In 1943, John List graduated from Bay City Central High School. That same year, over his mother's loud protests, he enlisted in the United States Army. It was one of the few times in his life that John would defy his mother's wishes. World War II was raging, and young men across America were signing up to serve. For John, the military represented escape. It was a chance to get away from his mother's suffocating control and his father's cold distance. John served as a laboratory technician during the war. In 1944, his father died at age 85. John came home for the funeral, but people noticed he showed no signs of grief. His face was blank, emotionless. Already, at 19 years old, John List seemed incapable of expressing normal human feelings. He was cold, detached, robotic. After the funeral, he returned to his military duties. He was shipped overseas to the Pacific Theater, though the war ended before he saw much action. While serving abroad, John acquired an Austrian Steyr 1912 semi-automatic pistol. He kept the gun as a souvenir. Nearly 3 decades later, he would use it to kill his family. When John returned from the war in 1946, Alma pushed him to attend college. She wanted him to have a respectable, stable career. She suggested accounting because it was safe, secure, and paid well. John listened to his mother, as he always did. He enrolled at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, earning a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting. While he was in college, Alma took the bus once a month to Ann Arbor to spend the weekend with her son. Even in college, John could not escape his mother's grip. She needed to be close to him, to know what he was doing, to maintain control. In November 1950, as the Korean War escalated, John was recalled to active military service. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant and sent to Fort Eustis in Virginia. It was there, away from his mother for the first time in his life, that John met a woman who would become his first wife. Her name was Helen Morris Taylor. She was a widow whose husband, an infantry officer, had been killed in action in Korea. Helen lived near the base with her young daughter, Brenda. She was attractive, outgoing, and sociable in ways that John was not. She drank alcohol and enjoyed reading, sometimes devouring 2 books a day, while lounging on the sofa with a glass of scotch. Helen and John began dating. At some point during their courtship, Helen told John she was pregnant. John, a devout Lutheran who believed sex before marriage was a sin, felt he had no choice but to marry her. They planned a wedding quickly, but after the wedding, Helen admitted she had been mistaken. She was not pregnant after all. John suspected for the rest of his life that Helen had lied to trick him into marriage. He believed she had manipulated him, and he resented her for it. But John did not believe in divorce. He was married now, and in his mind, marriage was forever. So he went forward with the arrangement, despite his doubts and his growing resentment. John and Helen were married on the 1st of December 1951 in Baltimore, Maryland. Helen insisted they marry in Maryland because it did not require blood tests to obtain a marriage license. John did not understand why this mattered at the time. Years later, he would learn the terrible truth. Helen had syphilis, contracted from her first husband. She knew about the disease, but kept it hidden from John. Had they married in most other states, the required blood test would have revealed her condition, and the wedding might never have happened. Helen chose Maryland specifically to avoid detection. It was a secret she would keep from John for 18 years, and by the time he learned the truth, the damage was already done. After their honeymoon, John and Helen picked up Brenda and began their life as a family of 3. They moved to Northern California when the Army transferred John to the Finance Corps. In 1952, John completed his second tour of duty and left the military. He took a job with an accounting firm in Detroit, then moved to a position as audit supervisor at Sutherland Paper Company in Kalamazoo, Michigan. The family settled in Kalamazoo, and Helen liked it there. She joined 3 book clubs and spent her afternoons reading. John was less impressed with how his wife spent her time. When he came home from work, Helen was often on the sofa with a book and a drink, while childcare, housework, and dinner preparation fell to him. On the 8th of January 1955, Helen gave birth to their first child together, a daughter they named Patricia Marie. Everyone called her Patty. She was the light of her parents' lives. Even Alma, who had never warmed to Helen, melted when she saw her first grandchild. For the first and only time, Alma kissed Helen. On the 21st of October 1956, Helen gave birth to their second child, a son named John Frederick. On the 26th of August 1958, their third child was born, another son named Frederick Michael. The family called him Freddie. They now had 4 children in total: Brenda from Helen's first marriage, plus Patty, John Jr., and Freddie. By 1959, John had risen to general supervisor of the paper company's accounting department. He was earning a decent salary, and the family should have been comfortable, but cracks were forming beneath the surface. Helen's drinking was getting worse. She was becoming increasingly unstable, though John did not yet know why. The syphilis she had contracted from her first husband was progressing, slowly destroying her mind and body. But she still said nothing to John or to her doctors. The disease remained her secret. In 1960, Brenda got pregnant at age 16. John and Helen sent her away to a home for unwed mothers. It was a cruel decision, a rejection of a girl who needed her family's support. But in John's mind, Brenda had sinned, and there were consequences for sin. After Brenda gave birth and gave up her baby for adoption, she left the household and never returned. She married soon after and started her own life. Years later, people would say that being cast out may have saved Brenda's life. That same year, John moved the family to Rochester, New York, where he took a job with Xerox. He eventually became director of accounting services, a prestigious position, but despite his success on paper, John struggled in the workplace. He was cold, awkward, and unable to connect with his coworkers. He lacked social skills. He could not make small talk or laugh at jokes. He wore suits and ties to mow his lawn, and when he encountered neighbors, he avoided eye contact and pretended he did not see them. People thought he was strange, odd, different. He had no friends. His only social outlet was the Lutheran Church, where he was a Sunday school teacher and a respected member of the congregation. In 1965, John accepted what seemed like a dream position, vice president and comptroller at a bank in Jersey City, New Jersey. The job came with a significant salary, and John decided to move his family into a home that would reflect his new status. He chose a 19-room Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey. The house had a name, Breeze Knoll. It was the most expensive home ever built in Westfield at the time it was constructed in 1885. The mansion had 3 floors, 18 rooms, marble fireplaces, a ballroom with a Tiffany-stained glass skylight, worth at least $100,000, and sprawling grounds. It was spectacular, grand, and far beyond what the List family could afford. Alma provided the down payment for the house, which came with a condition: she would move into the 3rd-floor apartment. Helen was unhappy about this arrangement. She had never gotten along with her mother-in-law, and the thought of living under the same roof was unpleasant. But they needed Alma's money, so Helen agreed. Alma moved into the attic apartment, where she would live for the next 6 years. The arrangement made everyone unhappy. Alma felt isolated on the 3rd floor. Helen felt invaded in her own home. The mansion was beautiful, but it was also a prison. The Lists quickly realized they were in over their heads financially. The house was enormous and expensive to maintain. They could not afford to heat it properly or furnish all the rooms. Large sections of the mansion remained empty and cold. The family essentially lived in only a few rooms, while the rest of the house sat unused. The heating bills were astronomical. The property taxes were crushing. John had stretched himself too thin, and he knew it, but his pride would not allow him to admit his mistake. Then, things got worse. In 1969, Helen's secret finally came to light. During a thorough medical examination, doctors discovered that she had tertiary syphilis, the final and most destructive stage of the disease. Helen had known about the syphilis since her first marriage but had concealed it from John for 18 years. By the time the diagnosis was made, the disease had progressed significantly. Combined with her heavy drinking, the syphilis had transformed Helen from an attractive, vibrant woman into what trial testimony would later describe as an unkempt and paranoid recluse. She rarely left the house. She neglected her appearance and her responsibilities. She drank constantly, which made everything worse, and she verbally humiliated John, especially about his sexual performance, which she compared unfavorably to her first husband. She emasculated him in front of their children and anyone else who would listen. John's professional life was also crumbling. Despite his advanced degrees and his title, John could not hold a job. His cold demeanor and inability to socialize made him a poor fit for most workplaces. He lost job after job, though he never told his family about his failures. In 1971, the bank where he worked as vice president closed, and John was laid off. It was a devastating blow, both financially and to his pride. But instead of telling Helen, Alma, or his children what had happened, John kept up the charade. Every morning, he put on a suit and tie, picked up his briefcase, and left the house as if he were going to work. He spent his days at the Westfield train station, reading newspapers and going to job interviews that never resulted in offers. In the evening, he came home at the usual time, as if he had just completed a normal workday. Money was running out fast. John had no income, and the bills kept piling up. He could not pay the mortgage. He could not pay the utilities. He could not put food on the table. To avoid defaulting on the mortgage, John began stealing money from his mother's bank accounts. Alma had savings, and John had access to them. He skimmed money quietly, hoping she would not notice. To bring in extra cash, John encouraged his children to get part-time jobs. He told them it would teach them maturity and responsibility, but the real reason was that the family needed every dollar they could scrape together. John's world was falling apart. His financial problems were out of control. His wife was an alcoholic with advanced syphilis who publicly humiliated him. His children were teenagers, and John believed they were straying from the church and from God. Patty, at 16, was involved in theater and had been caught smoking marijuana. John viewed both as signs of moral corruption. His sons were interested in pursuits that John considered unchristian. He felt his family was slipping into sin, and he was powerless to stop it. In John's rigid, black and white worldview, he saw only two paths: poverty and spiritual ruin, or salvation through death. In early November 1971, John came to a decision. He believed the only way to save his family's souls was to kill them. He believed that if they died before they fell further into sin, they would go to heaven. If he allowed them to live, they would suffer through poverty, lose their faith, and be damned forever. In John's twisted logic, murder was an act of mercy. He was giving them the gift of eternal life in paradise. A few weeks before the murders, John called a family meeting. He asked each family member what kind of funeral they would want. It was a strange, unsettling question, but no one thought much of it at the time. John was planning ahead, making sure he knew exactly what to do after he killed them. The 9th of November 1971 started like any other day. John made breakfast for his children, then saw them off to school. Patty, John Jr., and Freddie left the house with their backpacks, never suspecting it would be the last time they saw their home or their father alive. After the children left, Helen came down to the kitchen. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper and eating toast. It was her routine, the same thing she did every morning. John went to the garage, where he had hidden 2 handguns in the pocket of a military jacket. One was his 9mm Steyr 1912 semi-automatic, the souvenir from World War II. The other was his father's Colt .22 caliber revolver. John loaded both guns and returned to the kitchen. Helen was still sitting at the table, sipping her coffee. She did not see John approach from behind. He raised the gun and shot her in the back of the head. Helen died instantly. The bullet went through her jaw and into her brain. John then fired wildly around the kitchen, bullets hitting the wall. There was blood everywhere, spattered across the floor and the cabinets. John left Helen's body where it had fallen and went upstairs to the 3rd floor, to his mother's apartment. Alma was 84 years old and frail. She had heard a loud noise and called out to ask what it was. John told her he would check it out. He asked her to look out one window while he checked another. As Alma walked to the window, John raised the gun and shot her above the left eye. She died immediately. Her knees buckled and she collapsed to the floor. John wrapped her body in a carpet runner and dragged her into a closet. He could not carry her down the stairs because she was too heavy, so he left her on the 3rd floor, away from the ballroom where he planned to place the others. John returned to the kitchen. He dragged Helen's body through the house, leaving a trail of blood. He pulled her into the ballroom and laid her on a Boy Scout sleeping bag on the floor. Then he cleaned up the blood in the kitchen as best he could. He wanted the crime scene to be orderly. He made himself lunch, ate it, and washed the dishes. He was calm, methodical, following his plan step by step. John then left the house and drove to the post office, where he canceled mail delivery. He stopped at the milkman's route to cancel milk delivery. He called the children's schools and told administrators that the family would be traveling to North Carolina to visit a sick relative, and the children would be absent for an extended period. No one questioned him. He went to his bank and closed his accounts. He went to his mother's bank and cashed her savings bonds. He was tying up loose ends, making sure no one would come looking for the family for as long as possible. At noon, 6-year-old Patty called from school. She said she was feeling sick and asked to be picked up. John drove to her school and brought her home. As Patty walked through the front door of Breeze Knoll, her father shot her in the back of the head. She died instantly. John dragged her body to the ballroom and laid her on a sleeping bag next to her mother. Later in the afternoon, 3-year-old Freddie came home. John was waiting for him. As Freddie entered the house, John shot him in the back of the head. Freddie collapsed immediately. John dragged his son's body to the ballroom and placed him next to his mother and sister. 3 down, 1 to go. John then drove to Westfield High School, where 5-year-old John Jr. was playing in a soccer game. John stood on the sidelines and watched his son play. He cheered for him. After the game ended, John drove his son home. On the way back, John told the boy he was proud of him. John Jr., who did not know his mother, sister, and brother were already dead, probably felt happy. His father rarely gave compliments. When they arrived home, John told his son to bring something in from the car. As John Jr. walked back into the house, his father tried to shoot him in the back of the head like the others, but something went wrong. The gun misfired. John Jr. realized what was happening. He turned to face his father, and a struggle began. The boy tried to defend himself, fighting for his life, but he was no match for his father. John fired repeatedly, shooting his son multiple times in the chest and face. Later, forensic evidence would show that John Jr. was shot at least 10 times. The killing was messy, violent, prolonged. John later testified at trial that he kept shooting because he did not want his son to suffer. But the autopsy told a different story. The boy had fought hard, and his father had brutally overpowered him. John dragged his son's body to the ballroom. He arranged all 4 bodies on sleeping bags in a neat row: Helen, Patty, John Jr., and Freddie. He straightened them out, making sure they looked peaceful. He draped towels over their faces. Then he knelt down and prayed for their souls. He believed he had done the right thing. He believed he had saved them from poverty and sin. He believed they would thank him when they all met again in heaven. After the prayers, John sat down at his desk and wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor at Redeemer Lutheran Church. The letter was a detailed confession. John explained that he had killed his family to save their souls. He wrote that he saw too much evil in the world and could not bear to watch his loved ones fall into sin. He wrote that poverty would have destroyed them and turned them away from God. He wrote that killing them was the only way to ensure they would go to heaven. The letter was cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of remorse. John truly believed he had performed an act of mercy. John placed the letter on his desk, along with other important documents. He removed his picture from every family photograph in the house. He did not want to be identified easily. He tuned a radio to a religious station and left it playing loudly through the house's intercom system. He turned on all the lights. He lowered the thermostat to preserve the bodies as long as possible. He wanted to delay discovery for as long as he could, giving himself time to disappear. Before leaving, John sat down to dinner. He ate alone in the house, with his dead family lying in the next room. After dinner, he washed his dishes. Everything had to be clean and in order. Then, on the morning of November 10, John List walked out of Breeze Knoll for the last time. He got into the family car, a green 1963 Chevrolet Impala sedan, and drove to John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City. He left the car in long-term parking, creating the impression that he had flown somewhere. But John never boarded a plane. Instead, he took a train. He traveled first to Michigan, his home state, then to Colorado. He was starting a new life. The bodies of Helen, Patty, John Jr., Freddie, and Alma List remained undiscovered for nearly a month. John's careful planning worked. The canceled mail and milk deliveries meant no one came to the door. The lies he told the schools meant no one questioned the children's absence. The family was reclusive, so neighbors did not think much of not seeing them. The lights burned in the windows of Breeze Knoll for days until, one by one, they burned out. The house sat dark and silent, holding its terrible secret. On the 7th of December 1971, nearly a month after the murders, someone finally raised an alarm. Patty's drama coach at school became concerned about her extended absence and contacted the police. Officers went to Breeze Knoll to investigate. When they entered the house, they heard organ music piping through the intercom system. The house was cold because the heat had been turned down. As they walked through the mansion, they found the 5 bodies in the ballroom. The sight was horrific. The bodies had been there for almost 4 weeks. Helen, Patty, John Jr., and Freddie lay in a row on sleeping bags, with towels draped over their faces. Upstairs, Alma was wrapped in a carpet in the closet. All 5 had been shot. Officers also found John's confession letter on the desk. It made clear who the killer was and why he had done it. A nationwide manhunt was launched immediately. John List became one of America's most wanted fugitives. Police investigated hundreds of leads, but none panned out. John had destroyed all recent photographs of himself, making it difficult for police to know what he looked like. His car was found at JFK Airport, but there was no evidence he had boarded a flight. Wanted posters were distributed across the country and even to West Germany and German-speaking areas of South Africa, since John spoke fluent German, but there were no solid leads. John List had vanished. On the 11th of December 1971, the funeral for the List family was held at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Westfield. 5 caskets lined the front of the church. Hundreds of mourners attended. Helen's mother, Eve Morris, wept openly. Helen's sister Jean and her husband Gene flew in from Oklahoma. Patty's friends from school and the drama club cried. John Jr.'s teammates from the soccer team served as pallbearers. Freddie's classmates stood in shock, unable to comprehend how this could have happened. After the service, Helen, Patty, John Jr., and Freddie were buried together at Fairview Cemetery in Westfield. Alma's body was flown to Michigan and interred at St. Lorenz Lutheran Cemetery in Frankenmuth, next to her husband. Breeze Knoll sat empty after the murders. The house was a crime scene, a place of unimaginable horror. No one wanted to live there. On August 1972, 9 months after the murders, the mansion burned to the ground in a fire. Officials ruled it arson, but the case was never solved, and no suspects were ever identified. The beautiful ballroom, with its Tiffany-stained glass skylight, worth $100,000 in 1972, shattered in the flames. Had John sold that skylight, he could have paid off all his debts. But he never knew its value. The mansion was destroyed, and with it went a piece of Westfield's history. A new house was built on the site in 1974, but the memory of what happened there lingered. Meanwhile, John List was building a new life. As the FBI later discovered, he had traveled by train from New Jersey to Michigan, then to Colorado. In early 1972, he settled in Denver under a new name, Robert Peter Clark. He chose the name of a college classmate, though the real Bob Clark later said he had never known John List. John took an accounting job in Denver and quickly fell into a familiar routine. He joined a Lutheran church, just as he had in Westfield. He became active in the congregation, running a carpool for church members who needed transportation. He was quiet, polite, and unremarkable. No one suspected he was a mass murderer. From 1979 to 1986, John worked as a comptroller at a paper box manufacturer outside Denver. He was good at his job, though his co-workers found him cold and hard to get to know. At a church social gathering, John met a woman named Dolores Miller. She worked as an Army PX clerk. She was kind, devout, and completely unaware of the man's dark past. John and Dolores began dating. On her part, Dolores saw a quiet, religious man who attended church regularly and seemed to live a simple, honest life. John told her he was from Michigan and that his first wife had died of cancer. It was a lie, but Dolores had no reason to doubt him. They married in 1985. Dolores believed she had found a good, stable husband. She had no idea she was married to John List. In February 1987, something strange happened. Wanda Flannery, a neighbor and friend of Dolores in Denver, was reading a magazine at the grocery store when she saw an article about the List family murders. The article included an old photograph of John List. Flannery was stunned. The man in the photograph looked exactly like Bob Clark. She showed the article to Dolores and asked if it was her husband. Dolores looked at the photo for a long moment before saying no, it was not him. Dolores either did not see the resemblance or did not want to see it. She tore up the article. Flannery let the matter drop, but she did not forget. In February 1988, John and Dolores moved to Midlothian, Virginia, a suburb of Richmond. John took an accounting job at a small firm called Madrea, Joyner, Kirkham, and Woody. The couple bought a house in the Brandermill neighborhood for $76,000. Dolores put down $12,000 toward the purchase. They settled into their new life, and everything seemed normal. John was Bob Clark, the quiet accountant who went to church every Sunday. No one in Virginia knew who he really was. But John List's luck was about to run out. In February 1988, a new television show premiered on Fox, America's Most Wanted. The show was hosted by John Walsh, whose own son had been kidnapped and murdered years earlier. The premise of the show was simple: profile unsolved crimes and fugitives, show the public what these criminals looked like, and ask viewers to call in with tips. The show quickly became a hit, and in 1989, producers decided to feature the John List case. There was one major problem. All recent photographs of John List had been destroyed. The only images law enforcement had were from the early 1960 seconds, nearly 30 years old. To solve this problem, the producers reached out to a forensic artist in Philadelphia named Frank Bender. Bender was known for his remarkable ability to create age-progressed busts of fugitives and reconstruct the faces of unidentified bodies. He had helped solve numerous cold cases with his sculptures. Bender studied everything he could find about John List. He looked at old family photographs. He spoke with criminal psychologist Richard Walter, who helped create a profile of List. Together, they made educated guesses about how List would have aged over 18 years. Walter believed that List, because of his strict religious beliefs, would never undergo plastic surgery. Walter also believed List would not diet or exercise excessively, meaning his aging would follow a natural pattern. Bender used this information to craft his bust. He showed List with a receding hairline, sagging jowls, thicker glasses, and the weight gain that comes with middle age. Bender even guessed that List would still dress conservatively, so he sculpted him wearing a suit and tie. The bust was completed and photographed. On the 21st of May 1989, America's Most Wanted aired its segment on the John List murders. The show featured Frank Bender's age-progressed bust, along with details about the case and a plea for the public's help. The episode aired during the show's first year on television, and the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of tips poured in from across the country. One of those tips came from a woman in Richmond, Virginia. It was Wanda Flannery, the same neighbor who had shown Dolores the magazine article 2 years earlier. Flannery was watching America's Most Wanted when she saw the bust. She was certain it was Bob Clark. The resemblance was uncanny. This time, Flannery did not hesitate. She called the show and reported that John List was living in Midlothian, Virginia, under the name Robert Clark. She provided his address and the name of the accounting firm where he worked. On the 1st of June 1989, less than 2 weeks after the America's Most Wanted episode aired, FBI agents descended on the accounting firm in Richmond where Bob Clark worked. They approached the quiet, bespectacled man at his desk and asked if he was John List. The man insisted they were mistaken. He said his name was Robert Clark and that he had never heard of John List. But the agents were not convinced. They arrested him and took him in for questioning. Clark, or List, continued to insist he was not the fugitive. He maintained his alias for several months, even after he was extradited to Union County, New Jersey. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. His fingerprints matched those on file from John List's military service records. Evidence found at the crime scene linked him to the murders. Finally, on the 16th of February 1990, faced with irrefutable proof, the man admitted the truth. He was John Emil List, and he had murdered his family on the 9th of November 1971. The trial began in April 1990, nearly 19 years after the murders. John List was 64 years old. The prosecution was led by prosecutors who argued that List had committed cold-blooded, premeditated murder to escape his financial problems and start a new life. They pointed to the meticulous planning, the lies he told to delay discovery, the way he calmly ate dinner after killing his family, and the fact that he had fled and created a new identity. This was not the act of an insane man, they said. This was calculated murder. The defense, led by attorneys David Bruck and Judy Clark, argued that List had been temporarily insane at the time of the murders. They called psychiatrists who diagnosed List with obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. They presented evidence of his troubled upbringing, his domineering mother, his wife's alcoholism and syphilis, his financial desperation. They claimed List was suffering from a severe mental breakdown and truly believed he was saving his family's souls. They pointed to his own statement that he had intended to commit suicide after the murders but could not go through with it because he believed suicide was an unforgivable sin that would prevent him from going to heaven. During the trial, testimony revealed the full extent of Helen's syphilis and how it had affected her behavior. Medical experts testified that the disease, combined with her heavy drinking, had transformed her into a paranoid and unstable woman who verbally abused and humiliated her husband. But the prosecution countered that none of this justified murder. Millions of people faced financial problems, difficult marriages, and personal crises without killing their families. John List, they said, killed his wife, mother, and children because it was convenient. He wanted to start over without the burden of supporting them. The jury deliberated and reached a verdict quickly. On the 12th of April 1990, John Emil List was found guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder. The judge was unsparing in his condemnation. He called List a man without remorse and without honor. He said that, after 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it was time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave. On the 1st of May 1990, the judge sentenced John List to 5 consecutive life terms in prison. Under this sentence, List would not be eligible for parole for nearly 125 years. He would die in prison. At his sentencing hearing, List denied direct responsibility for his actions. He said he felt that, because of his mental state at the time, he was unaccountable for what happened. He asked everyone affected by his crimes for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer. But his words rang hollow. There was no genuine remorse in his voice, no real acknowledgement of the horror he had inflicted. List filed appeals, claiming his judgment had been impaired by post-traumatic stress disorder from his military service. He argued that the confession letter he left at the crime scene should have been inadmissible because it was a confidential communication to his pastor. All his appeals were denied. John List spent the remaining 18 years of his life behind bars at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. He became what prison officials described as a model inmate. He participated in educational programs and engaged with mental health professionals. He wrote poetry and attended group sessions for prison veterans, but the shadow of his crimes followed him everywhere. He was one of the most infamous murderers in American history, and everyone knew who he was and what he had done. During his years in prison, List gave occasional interviews. In 2002, ABC News interviewed him for a story on the murders. List spoke about his belief that he had sent his family to heaven by killing them. He expressed hope that when he died and went to heaven, he would be reunited with his family. He said he believed that when they met again, they would either have forgiven him or would not realize what had happened. He said he was sure that if they recognized each other, they would enjoy each other's company, just as they had on Earth when times were better. His words revealed a man who remained utterly disconnected from reality, unable or unwilling to grasp the magnitude of his actions. Dolores Miller, the woman who had married John List thinking he was Bob Clark, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. She had been completely unaware of his past. The revelation that her husband was a mass murderer shattered her world. Dolores kept a low profile after the divorce, and little is known about what happened to her afterward. She wanted nothing more to do with the man who had deceived her for years. On the 21st of March, 2008, John Emil List died of complications from pneumonia at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. He was 82 years old. He had spent 18 years in prison, the same amount of time he had spent as a fugitive. His body was claimed by an unknown person, and his ashes were not interred with his mother's remains in Michigan. In death, as in life, John List remained a man apart, disconnected from the family he had destroyed and the mother who had shaped him. The case of John List remains one of the most notorious family annihilations in American criminal history. It is a story of religion twisted into justification for murder, of financial desperation leading to unspeakable violence, of a man so rigid and controlled that he could not bend without breaking. It is a story of 5 innocent people whose lives were stolen by someone who claimed to love them. The ballroom at Breeze Knoll, where 4 bodies lay for nearly a month, is gone, destroyed in the fire. But the memory of what happened there will never be erased. Helen List, 46 years old, died at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee in her hand. Alma List, 84 years old, died looking out a window in her 3rd-floor apartment. Patricia List, 16 years old, died coming home sick from school, trusting her father to care for her. Frederick List, 13 years old, died walking through his front door after school. John Frederick List Jr., 15 years old, died fighting for his life against the father he had looked up to and loved. 5 people, 5 lives, 5 futures stolen by a man who believed he was saving their souls. John List's name will forever be synonymous with family annihilation, with the darkest impulses of the human heart, with the catastrophic failure of faith and reason. The List murders stand as a grim reminder that evil does not always announce itself with fury and rage. Sometimes it comes quietly, methodically, wearing a suit and tie, carrying a Bible, and insisting until the very end that it was all for the best. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Diane Downs, 1983, the bushy-haired stranger. Diane Downs, 1983, the bushy-haired stranger. Elizabeth Diane Fredrickson was born on the 7th of August, 1955, in Phoenix, Arizona. Her parents, Wesley Linden and Willadine Fredrickson, were young when they had her and raised their family with strict conservative values rooted in Baptist beliefs. The family forbade trendy clothing, makeup, and modern fashions, which made Diane feel like an outsider among her peers. She was bullied at school for being different and struggled to fit in with other kids her age. Growing up, Diane later testified that her father sexually abused her, starting when she was around 12 years old. She claimed these incidents never progressed to full sexual intercourse, but involved inappropriate touching and fondling. Her parents denied these allegations completely, and Diane herself would later recant the story in the late 1980 seconds, leaving the truth unclear. Regardless of what happened, Diane grew up feeling isolated and unloved in a household that valued strict discipline over warmth and affection. When Diane turned 14, her parents allowed her to attend charm school, and this became a turning point. She began to dress more fashionably, styled her hair in modern ways, and transformed her appearance. Boys at school suddenly noticed her, and Diane, who had been starving for attention and affection her entire life, responded eagerly. She became known for her flirtatious behavior, her swaying hips, and her giggly, come-hither personality. She dated older boys and threw herself into relationships with an intensity that suggested she was searching for the love she never received at home. At Moon Valley High School in Phoenix, Diane met Stephen Downs, and the two became inseparable. They were the couple always seen together, arm in arm, completely wrapped up in each other. After graduating high school, they briefly separated when Steve enlisted in the United States Navy, and Diane enrolled at Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College in Orange, California. But Diane was expelled after just 1 year for promiscuous behavior. She had promised Steve she would remain faithful while they were apart, but she had been sleeping with other men at college. When she returned home in disgrace, she and Steve reunited. On the 13th of November 1973, Diane and Steve ran away from home and got married. Diane later admitted at her trial that she did not marry Steve for love, but rather to escape her parents' controlling household. She wanted freedom from the strict rules and the cold atmosphere of her childhood home. Their marriage began with high hopes, but quickly deteriorated. The couple fought constantly, primarily about money and infidelity. Diane continued to have affairs with other men throughout their marriage, and Steve grew increasingly suspicious and resentful. In October 1974, Their first child, Christy Ann, was born. Diane found that being pregnant gave her a sense of purpose and control that she had never experienced before. She loved the feeling of having a life growing inside her that was completely dependent on her. For the first time, she felt powerful and needed. But once Christy was born, the reality of motherhood set in. Diane had to care for an infant while also working part-time at a thrift store and taking care of Steve. The romance of pregnancy faded, and she found herself wanting that feeling back. In 1976, she gave birth to their second daughter, Cheryl Lynn. Between Christy and Cheryl, Diane had become pregnant again, but chose to have an abortion. Later, after seeing pictures of fetuses at an anti-abortion booth at a local fair, she regretted her decision deeply. She testified that she had been told a 6-week fetus was nothing more than mucus, and seeing the pictures made her feel terrible guilt. She said she felt the need to make amends for what she had done. Steve Downs had a vasectomy after Cheryl was born because he did not want more children. But in 1979, Diane became pregnant again. She admitted she had deliberately gotten pregnant by seducing a male friend named Mark Sager because she craved that feeling of carrying a baby again. She wanted to feel needed and in control, and pregnancy gave her that. On the 27th of December 1979, she gave birth to Stephen Daniel, nicknamed Danny. Steve knew immediately that Danny was not his biological child, and this became the final breaking point in their marriage. The couple divorced in 1980, with Steve citing Diane's repeated infidelity and their ongoing financial problems as the primary reasons. After the divorce, Diane struggled. She had 3 children to care for on her own and limited financial resources. Friends and family who knew Diane during this time reported that she was not a good mother. She treated her children like burdens rather than blessings. According to Steve, Diane forbade the children from doing almost anything and showed little maternal warmth. One particularly disturbing incident involved Cheryl, who was about 6 years old at the time. Steve caught Cheryl jumping on her bed, which was against the rules, and made her sit down and think about what she had done. While sitting there calmly, Cheryl looked up at Steve and asked if there was a gun in the house. When Steve said no and asked why she was asking, Cheryl replied that she wanted to kill herself because her mom said she was bad. This chilling statement suggested that Diane was verbally abusive to her children and made them feel worthless. Diane decided to try to become a surrogate mother as a way to make money. She applied for a surrogacy program but failed the psychiatric evaluation twice. The tests indicated that she was intelligent but also showed signs of psychosis and mental instability. Despite these red flags, some sources say she eventually did give birth to a surrogate baby on the 8th of May 1982, a girl she named Jennifer before turning her over to the intended parents. Other sources dispute whether she actually completed the surrogacy. Regardless, Diane continued to struggle financially and emotionally. While working at a mobile home manufacturing company in Mesa, Arizona, Diane began having affairs with several co-workers. It was during this time that she met Robert Knickerbocker, a married man who worked at the United States Postal Service. Robert and Diane began an intense affair that consumed Diane completely. She fell deeply in love with him and became obsessed with the idea of them being together permanently. She wrote him letters every single day, pouring out her feelings and begging him to leave his wife and be with her. But Robert had no intention of leaving his wife. He made it clear to Diane that he did not want to be a father and had no interest in raising children, not even his own if he were to have them. Diane's 3 children were a major obstacle to their relationship, and she knew it. Despite Robert's rejection, Diane could not let go. She began stalking him, showing up at his house and workplace uninvited. She told friends she would do anything to be with Robert, including killing his wife if necessary. Robert later told police that he was genuinely afraid of what Diane might do, and that he was relieved when she eventually moved away. In April 1983, Diane made a decision that she believed would solve all her problems. She packed up her 3 children and moved to Springfield, Oregon, taking a job with the United States Postal Service, delivering mail in the city of Cottage Grove. She told people that she moved to be closer to her parents, but the real reason was that she hoped Robert would change his mind and follow her to Oregon. She believed that if she created some distance, Robert would realize how much he loved her and wanted to be with her. She imagined him divorcing his wife, moving to Oregon, and starting a new life with her. But weeks went by, and Robert did not follow. He did not call, did not write, and did not respond to any of her letters. She sent him letter after letter, and each one was returned to her unopened. Robert had moved on with his life, reconciled with his wife, and wanted nothing more to do with Diane. For Diane, this rejection was unbearable. She had sacrificed everything and moved her entire life to Oregon, and Robert had not even noticed. She became increasingly desperate and angry. She could not understand why Robert did not want her. In her mind, the only thing standing between them was her children. If the children were gone, Robert would have no reason to reject her anymore. On the evening of the 19th of May, 1983, Diane loaded her 3 children into her red Nissan and told them they were going to visit a friend's new horse in the nearby town of Marcola. The children were excited for the outing. Christy was 8 years old, Cheryl was 7, and Danny was just 3. They visited the friend and saw the horse, and then Diane said it was time to head home. Instead of taking the main highway back to Springfield, Diane drove down Old Mohawk Road, a quiet rural road with very little traffic. She later claimed the children loved to go sightseeing and explore new routes, which is why she took the back roads. As darkness fell, the children grew tired from the long day. Christy, Cheryl, and Danny all fell asleep in the back seat of the car, lulled by the hum of the tires on the road and the music playing softly on the radio. Diane drove slowly down the empty road, knowing exactly what she was about to do. At some point, she pulled the car over to the side of the road and stopped. She reached into the front of the car and pulled out a .22 caliber Ruger semi-automatic pistol that she had purchased in Arizona. The gun was small and easy to handle. She got out of the car and opened the trunk, perhaps to create the illusion that she was looking for something. Then she walked back to the car, opened the rear door where her 3 sleeping children sat, and began shooting. Cheryl was shot twice and died almost instantly. Christy was shot twice in the chest, and the bullets caused massive internal damage and triggered a stroke. Danny was shot in the back, and the bullets severed his spine, paralyzing him from the waist down. After shooting all 3 of her children, Diane then turned the gun on herself and shot herself in the left forearm. The wound was superficial, designed to look like she had been in a struggle, but not serious enough to cause real harm. She then got back in the driver's seat and began driving toward Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield. Multiple witnesses later reported seeing Diane's car on the road that night, and every single one of them said the same thing. The car was moving extremely slowly, barely 5 to 7 miles per hour, as if the driver was deliberately taking her time. Diane later claimed she had driven like a lunatic, speeding to the hospital to save her children. But the witnesses told a very different story. It appeared that Diane was hoping her children would die before she reached the hospital. Just before 11 o'clock at night, Diane pulled her blood-soaked car up to the emergency room entrance at Mackenzie Willamette Hospital and screamed for help. Hospital staff rushed out and found a horrific scene. The back seat of the car was covered in blood. Cheryl, the 7-year-old, was already dead. Christy and Danny were barely clinging to life, covered in blood and gasping for air. Diane herself had a gunshot wound to her left forearm, but it was not life-threatening. She appeared surprisingly calm for someone who had just experienced such a traumatic event. Dr. Stephen Wilhite, the surgeon on call that night, had just walked into his house when his beeper went off. He rushed back to the hospital as fast as he could, terrified of what he would find. When he arrived, he immediately went to work trying to save the 2 surviving children. Christy had been shot in the chest and had suffered a massive stroke due to her dangerously low blood pressure. Her chances of survival were slim. Danny had been shot in the back, and the damage to his spine was catastrophic. He would be paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. As doctors worked frantically to save the children, nurses and staff began to notice something strange about Diane's behavior. She showed no emotion. She did not cry, did not ask desperately about her children's conditions, and did not seem particularly upset. Instead, she made strange comments that shocked everyone who heard them. "Doctor, Wilhite later recalled that when he updated Diane on Christie's condition, she did not shed a single tear. She simply asked how Christie was doing in a flat, emotionless tone. Then she said things like, "Boy, this has really spoiled my vacation," and "That really ruined my new car." The staff was horrified. What kind of mother talks about her car and her vacation plans when her children are dying? When police arrived to interview Diane, she told them an elaborate story about what had happened. She said that after visiting her friend's horse, she was driving home on Old Mohawk Road when she saw a man standing in the middle of the road, flagging her down. She said her children were asleep in the back seat, and she pulled over because she thought the man needed help. But when she stopped, the man approached her window and demanded her car keys. She said he was a stranger with bushy, unkempt hair, and he looked rough and dangerous. Diane told police that she refused to give him the keys, and that's when things turned violent. She said she pretended to throw the keys into the bushes to distract him, but instead of going to look for them, the man began shooting. He shot at her children in the back seat, and she tried to fight him off. During the struggle, she said he shot her in the arm. She claimed that she managed to push him away, get back in the car, and speed to the hospital as fast as she could. The story sounded plausible on the surface, but investigators immediately noticed problems with it. Detective Doug Welch from the Lane County Sheriff's Office was assigned to the case, and he began to ask questions. Why would a mother be sightseeing on dark, empty roads late at night with 3 sleeping children in the car? Why would she stop for a stranger in the middle of nowhere? Why was she shot in the arm, but the attacker supposedly shot her children multiple times at close range? And most importantly, why did she seem so calm and unemotional about the whole thing? As the investigation continued, more red flags emerged. There was no blood splatter on the driver's side of the car, which should have been there if Diane had been sitting in the driver's seat during the shooting. There was no gunpowder residue on the driver's side door or the interior door panel, which indicated that the shots had not been fired from outside the car through the window. The forensic evidence suggested that the shooter had been inside the car or very close to the children when the shots were fired. When police asked Diane if she owned a gun, she said no. But both Steve Downs and Robert Knickerbocker later told investigators that Diane absolutely owned a .22 caliber handgun and that she had purchased it in Arizona during her marriage to Steve. Police searched Diane's apartment and found unfired bullet casings that had extractor marks identical to the marks on the casings found at the crime scene. These markings proved that the bullets had been fired from the same gun, a .22 caliber Ruger semi-automatic pistol. The actual gun was never found, suggesting that Diane had disposed of it after the shooting. Police also found Diane's personal diaries and the letters she had sent to Robert Knickerbocker that had been returned unopened. The diaries revealed Diane's obsession with Robert. She wrote that she would do anything to make him love her, that she thought about him constantly, and that she could not imagine life without him. The letters were even more desperate, filled with pleas for Robert to leave his wife and come to Oregon to be with her. When police interviewed Robert Knickerbocker, he confirmed that Diane had been obsessed with him and that he had told her repeatedly he did not want children in his life. He said Diane had stalked him, showed up at his house uninvited, and acted erratically. He told police that he believed Diane was capable of killing his wife if she thought it would clear the path for them to be together. He said he was relieved when Diane moved to Oregon because it meant she would finally leave him alone. He had reconciled with his wife, and he wanted nothing more to do with Diane. The prosecution's theory became clear. Diane had shot her children because she believed they were the obstacle preventing Robert from loving her. If the children were gone, Robert would have no reason to reject her anymore. In Diane's twisted mind, killing her children was the solution to her problems. 4 days after the shooting, police took Diane back to the crime scene and asked her to reenact what had happened. They filmed the entire reenactment, and the footage is deeply disturbing. Diane appeared carefree, almost cheerful, as she walked through the events of that night. She smiled, laughed at times, and showed no signs of trauma or grief. When she reenacted jumping into the car after being shot, her broken arm, which was in a sling, slammed into the steering wheel. The impact must have been excruciating because her arm consisted of 2 sharp, jagged bones with torn muscle and exposed nerves. Yet Diane barely flinched. Her lack of pain response and her casual demeanor horrified the investigators watching. Another disturbing piece of evidence came from the hospital. When Diane visited Christy in the hospital for the first time, hospital staff noticed something chilling. Christy, who was unable to speak due to the stroke, became visibly terrified when her mother walked into the room. Her heart rate spiked dramatically, and her eyes filled with fear. The staff realized that Christy was afraid of her own mother. This was not the reaction of a child who had been rescued by her mother from a dangerous stranger. This was the reaction of a child who knew her mother was the one who had hurt her. Over the following weeks and months, Christy slowly began to recover. She underwent intense physical and speech therapy to regain her ability to speak and move. Psychologists worked with her carefully, knowing that she held the key to solving the case, but also knowing that she was deeply traumatized. Christy initially told a hospital psychologist named Dr. Vergamini that she did not remember the shooting and was genuinely confused about what had happened. But as time went on and she felt safer, the truth began to emerge. Christy started writing down small pieces of information. At one point, she wrote the name of the person who shot her on a piece of paper, sealed it in an envelope, and threw the envelope into a fire. When her therapist finally convinced her to write it down again and keep it, the paper said 2 simple words: "My mom." Christy eventually regained enough of her speech to testify, though she still had a speech impediment and limited use of her right arm due to the stroke. On the 28th of February, 1984, 9 months after the shooting, Diane Downs was arrested and charged with 1 count of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of criminal assault. At the time of her arrest, Diane was pregnant again. She had deliberately gotten pregnant during the investigation, and she told reporters that she got pregnant because she missed Christy, Danny, and Cheryl so much. She said that having a baby would replace the effect her children gave her, the love and purpose and happiness. Many people, including the prosecution, believed that Diane got pregnant strategically to manipulate public opinion. They argued that she wanted people to look at her and think, how could a woman who loves children so much that she got pregnant have killed her own children? Diane denied this and insisted that her pregnancy was simply because she missed her kids and wanted to feel the joy of motherhood again. The trial began in May 1984 and lasted for 31 days. It was a media sensation that captivated the entire nation. Diane, who was 9 months pregnant, sat in the courtroom showing no emotion as the evidence against her was presented. The prosecution's case was built on several key pieces of evidence. First, there was the forensic evidence. The bullet casings found in Diane's apartment matched the casings found at the crime scene, proving they came from the same gun. Diane had lied about owning a gun, and both her ex-husband and her ex-lover confirmed she had purchased a .22 caliber handgun in Arizona. Second, there was the testimony of Robert Knickerbocker, who explained Diane's obsession with him and his rejection of her children. He testified that he had made it clear to Diane that he did not want to be a father and had no interest in children. Third, there was the testimony of witnesses who saw Diane driving extremely slowly toward the hospital, contradicting her claim that she had sped there in a panic. Fourth, there was the reenactment video, which showed Diane laughing and smiling as she walked through the events of the shooting. And fifth, there was the lack of blood splatter and gunpowder residue in the places where they should have been if Diane's story were true. But the most powerful evidence came from Christy Downs herself. The 8-year-old took the witness stand and testified in a halting, impaired voice about what had happened that night. When prosecutor Fred Hugi asked Christy if she remembered who shot her, Christy looked directly at the jury and said 2 words, "My mom." The courtroom fell silent. Christy described how her mother had stopped the car, opened the trunk, walked back to the rear door, and then shot all 3 children while they sat in the back seat. She said her mother then shot herself in the arm before driving to the hospital. Christy's testimony was devastating. It was the testimony of a child who had no reason to lie, a child who had nearly died and lost her sister because of her mother's actions. The prosecution also presented testimony from a psychiatrist who had evaluated Diane. The psychiatrist diagnosed Diane with narcissistic, histrionic, and antisocial personality disorders. He testified that Diane showed no remorse for her actions, regarded her children as objects or possessions rather than people, and had only superficial feelings for them that extended only to how they affected her own life. He described Diane as someone who fit the profile of malignant hysteria psychopathy, a severe and dangerous condition. The psychiatrist stated that Diane was a deviant sociopath who posed a continued threat to society. Throughout the trial, Diane maintained her innocence. She insisted that a bushy-haired stranger had shot her children and that she was the victim of a terrible crime. She blamed the police for not finding the real killer and accused them of incompetence and corruption. She showed no remorse, no grief, and no empathy for her children. She spoke about the case as if it were an interesting puzzle rather than the murder of her own daughter. On the 17th of June, 1984, after 3 days of deliberation totaling 36 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Diane was convicted of 1 count of murder for Cheryl's death, 2 counts of attempted murder for Christy and Danny, and 2 counts of criminal assault. The judge sentenced Diane to life in prison plus 50 years. She was required to serve at least 25 years before being considered for parole. The judge made it very clear when pronouncing the sentence that he did not intend for Diane Downs ever to be free again. Most of her sentence was ordered to be served consecutively, meaning back-to-back rather than concurrently. Diane showed no emotion when the verdict was read. She did not cry, did not react, and barely seemed to register what was happening. The jury members later said that reaching the verdict had been agonizing and that they felt a tremendous weight lifted from their shoulders when it was over. They said they had agonized over the decision because they knew it would change Diane's life forever, but the evidence was overwhelming. Before Diane's sentencing, she gave birth to the baby she had been carrying throughout the trial. She named the baby girl Amy Elizabeth and was allowed to hold her briefly before the state took custody. 10 days before sentencing, the state of Oregon seized the baby and placed her up for adoption. A couple named Chris and Jackie Babcock adopted Amy and renamed her Rebecca Babcock. Diane's 2 surviving children, Christy and Danny, were also removed from her custody permanently. Initially, they were placed in foster care, but eventually, prosecutor Fred Hugie and his wife Joanne adopted both children in 1986. Hugie wanted to ensure that Christy and Danny grew up in a safe, loving environment where they would never have to fear their mother again. Diane was initially incarcerated at the Oregon Women's Correctional Center in Salem, Oregon. She was eligible for parole after 25 years, meaning her first parole hearing would be in 2009. Under Oregon law at the time, as a dangerous offender, Diane would be eligible for a parole hearing every 2 years until she was either released or died in prison. But Diane was not content to sit in prison quietly. She began planning an escape almost immediately. On the morning of the 11th of July, 1987, just 3 years into her sentence, Diane executed a daring escape plan. While guards were distracted and not looking, she used her clothing to protect herself from the barbed wire and scaled a 12 to 15-foot high chain-link fence surrounding the prison. She made it over the fence and dropped down on the other side to freedom. A 14-state manhunt was launched to find her. Law enforcement officials feared that Diane might try to travel to Springfield to harm or kidnap Christy and Danny. Prosecutor Fred Hugie was especially terrified because the prison was only 66 miles from his home, and he worried constantly that Diane would come after the children he had adopted. But Diane did not go far. For 10 days, she hid out at a house just a few blocks from the prison. She stayed with a man named Wayne Cipher, whose wife was also an inmate at the prison. Wayne later said that he was addicted to heroin at the time and not thinking clearly when he agreed to hide Diane. He said he knew the police would eventually find her and that he would get in trouble, but his drug use clouded his judgment. Police tracked Diane to Wayne's house through a clever piece of detective work. Investigators found a notepad in Diane's prison cell and noticed that there were indentations on the paper. They sent the notepad to the FBI, and using special techniques, they were able to reveal what had been written on the previous page. The indentations showed an address, a map to Wayne's house, and the words, "You are here." On the 21st of July 1987, 10 days after her escape, police stormed Wayne's house and found Diane in a locked upstairs bedroom. She was wearing boxer shorts and a man's shirt and looked stunned when officers burst in. She did not resist arrest and was taken back into custody without incident. Wayne Seifer was arrested and charged with hindering prosecution for harboring a fugitive. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 years of probation and 6 months in a restitution center. Diane received an additional 5-year sentence for the escape. After her recapture, Oregon officials decided that it was too dangerous to keep Diane in a prison so close to Christy and Danny. Fred Hugi lobbied heavily to have her transferred to another state, arguing that even with security upgrades, the risk of Diane escaping again and harming the children was too great. State officials agreed, and Diane was transferred to the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey. She was moved to a state where she had no connections, no friends, and no one to help her if she tried to escape again. In 1993, Diane was transferred again, this time to California. She spent time at Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California, and later at the Central California Women's Facility, also in Chowchilla. While in prison, Diane earned an associate degree in general studies and spent her time writing letters, maintaining her innocence, and developing increasingly bizarre conspiracy theories about who really shot her children. Diane's first parole hearing took place on the 9th of December 2008, after she had served 25 years in prison. She was 53 years old. During the hearing, Diane maintained her innocence and reaffirmed her story about the bushy-haired stranger. She told the parole board, "Over the years, I have told you and the rest of the world that a man shot me and my children. I have never changed my story." She portrayed herself as the victim of corrupt law enforcement, incompetent investigators, and a justice system that had railroaded her. She refused to take responsibility for her actions and showed no remorse or insight into her criminal behavior. Lane County District Attorney Douglas Harklerode wrote a letter to the parole board opposing her release. In the letter, he stated that Diane continued to fail to demonstrate any honest insight into her criminal behavior, and that even after her convictions, she continued to fabricate new versions of events. He noted that Diane alternately referred to her assailants as a bushy-haired stranger, 2 men wearing ski masks, drug dealers, and corrupt law enforcement officials. The parole board held a hearing that lasted 3 hours, during which they interviewed Diane via video from the California prison. After just 30 minutes of deliberation, the board unanimously voted to deny her parole. They stated that Diane showed no remorse, continued to blame others for her crimes, and remained a danger to society. They extended her next parole hearing to 2010, just 2 years later. Diane's second parole hearing took place in December 2010. Once again, she refused to take responsibility for her actions. She told the parole board that she could not talk about her children because it was too painful and that she had internalized her grief. She maintained her innocence and continued to push conspiracy theories about the real shooter. Lane County District Attorney Alex Gardner wrote another letter to the board, stating that Diane was using the parole hearing process not as a means of seeking rehabilitation, but as a platform to publicize her latest revelations and accusations. The parole board again denied her release, and this time they extended her next hearing for 10 years, until 2020. The board noted that Diane remained dangerous, showed no insight into her behavior, and posed a continued threat to society if released. Diane's third parole hearing took place in late 2020. By this time, she was 65 years old and had been in prison for 36 years. Once again, she maintained her innocence and refused to accept responsibility for murdering her daughter and attempting to murder her other 2 children. The parole board denied her release for a 3rd time, stating that she lacked remorse and remained a danger. Diane Downs remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. She is serving a sentence of life plus 50 years and will likely spend the rest of her life in prison. She continues to maintain her innocence, continues to blame others for her conviction, and continues to show no remorse for her actions. Psychiatrists and psychologists who have evaluated her over the years have consistently diagnosed her with narcissistic, histrionic, and antisocial personality disorders, and have labeled her a deviant sociopath. She is considered one of the most notorious and dangerous female criminals in American history. Christy and Danny, the two surviving children, were raised by Fred and Joanne Hughey after they were adopted in 1986. Christy went on to graduate from college, get married, and start her own family. She named one of her daughters after her late sister Cheryl, honoring the memory of the little girl who died that night in 1983. Christy has lived a happy, private life in Oregon and has largely stayed out of the public eye. She has never spoken publicly in detail about what happened that night or about her life afterward. Danny, who was paralyzed from the waist down at age 3, also went on to graduate from college and live a happy life. He became skilled with computers and has lived independently despite his disability. Like his sister, Danny has chosen to live privately and has not sought media attention. Both Christy and Danny have made it clear that they do not consider Diane Downs to be their mother. Their real parents are Fred and Joanne Hughey, the people who raised them, loved them, and gave them the stable, safe childhood they deserved. Rebecca Babcock, the baby born during Diane's trial, was raised by her adoptive parents Chris and Jackie Babcock and had no contact with Diane during her childhood. As an adult, Rebecca became curious about her biological mother and wrote letters to Diane in prison. But after learning more about who Diane really was, Rebecca came to regret ever reaching out. She has publicly stated that she considers Diane a monster and wants nothing to do with her. In 2010, Rebecca appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show and ABC's 20/20 to discuss how she felt about being the daughter of one of America's most infamous killers. She spoke candidly about the pain of knowing her mother had murdered one child and tried to kill 2 others. In 2020, Rebecca was the subject of a podcast called Happy Face, where she discussed her search for her biological father. Diane has never revealed who Rebecca's father is, claiming only that he was a young, attractive male who lost interest in her after she became pregnant. The Diane Downs case has been the subject of extensive media coverage over the decades. Crime writer Ann Rule wrote a best-selling book about the case called Small Sacrifices, published in 1987. The book detailed Diane's life, the murders, the investigation, and the trial, and became one of Rule's most famous work. In 1989, the book was adapted into a television movie, also called Small Sacrifices, starring Farrah Fawcett as Diane Downs. Fawcett's chilling portrayal of the narcissistic, remorseless killer earned critical acclaim and introduced the case to a whole new generation of viewers. The case has also been featured on numerous true crime television shows, including ABC's 20/20, Investigation Discovery's Deadly Women, and many others. The story continues to fascinate and horrify people because it represents one of the most fundamental betrayals imaginable. A mother murdering her own children, not out of mental illness or desperation, but out of selfishness and a desire to be free to pursue a romantic relationship. Diane Downs is the ultimate example of a parent who valued her own desires above the lives and well-being of her children. She saw them not as individuals with their own worth, but as obstacles standing in the way of what she wanted. When those obstacles became too inconvenient, she simply eliminated them. Her lack of remorse, her continued insistence on her innocence despite overwhelming evidence, and her complete inability to feel empathy for her victims make her one of the most disturbing criminals in modern American history. The name Diane Downs has become synonymous with evil, selfishness, and the ultimate betrayal of maternal love. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Jeffrey Robert MacDonald, 1970, The Fatal Vision Murders. Jeffrey Robert MacDonald, 1970, The Fatal Vision Murders. Jeffrey Robert MacDonald was born on the 12th of October 1943 in Jamaica, Queens, New York. He grew up in a poor neighborhood on Long Island with a strict but not abusive father who demanded obedience and achievement from his family. MacDonald showed early promise as a student and became extremely popular with his classmates at Patchogue High School. His peers voted him both most popular and most likely to succeed. His academic excellence earned him a scholarship to Princeton University, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. MacDonald seemed destined for greatness from a young age. While MacDonald was in the 8th grade, he met a girl named Colette Stevenson who would change the course of his life. The two dated briefly during their school years but broke up when they entered 9th grade. Years later, while MacDonald was attending Princeton and Colette was at another college, they rekindled their relationship. Their romance moved quickly, and in 1963, they learned that Colette was pregnant. MacDonald was 20 years old and still a student when he married Colette Stevenson on the 14th of September 1963. Their first daughter, Kimberly, was born in April 1964. Despite the challenges of being young parents, MacDonald continued his education with determination. MacDonald completed 3 years at Princeton before moving on to medical school at Northwestern University in Chicago. While at Northwestern, he proved himself to be a capable medical student. After graduating from medical school, he completed an internship at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York City. On the 1st of July 1969, MacDonald joined the United States Army. His military career took him to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where he was assigned to the Green Berets as a group surgeon for the 3rd Special Forces Group in September 1969. He held the rank of captain. His wife Colette and their 2 daughters moved with him to the military base. By this time, the MacDonald family had grown. Their second daughter, Kristen Jean, was born on the 8th of May, 1967, at Fort Bragg. Kimberly was almost 6 years old, and Kristen was 2.5 when the family settled into their home at 544 Castle Drive in a section of Fort Bragg reserved for married officers. The area was secure and patrolled by military police. MacDonald described Kimberly as feminine, intelligent, and shy, while Kristen was a boisterous tomboy who would defend her older sister if she saw other children bullying her. Colette had attended Skidmore College for 2 years and hoped to eventually earn a bachelor's degree in English literature and teach part-time. In February 1970, Colette was pregnant with their 3rd child, a boy. The couple had dreams of owning a farm in Connecticut after MacDonald completed his military service. He had already been accepted for a residency in orthopedics at Yale University to begin after his time in the Army ended. The MacDonald family appeared to have a bright and promising future ahead of them. Everything changed in the early morning hours of the 17th of February, 1970. It was a cold and rainy Tuesday morning. Just after 3:30 in the morning, an operator in Fayetteville, North Carolina, received a desperate phone call from a man who identified himself as Captain MacDonald. He begged her to call the military police and send an ambulance to 544 Castle Drive. He said the word stabbing weakly. She transferred the call to military police headquarters at Fort Bragg, where MacDonald repeated his plea for help. He said, "Help, 544 Castle Drive, stabbing, and hurry." The desk sergeant immediately dispatched several military police officers to the address, but the base hospital refused to send an ambulance until the MPs confirmed that one was actually necessary. As the military police drove toward Castle Drive, one officer named Kenneth Micah noticed something strange about 3 blocks away from the MacDonald home. At almost 4 in the morning, he saw a young woman wearing a raincoat and a wide-brimmed floppy hat just standing in the rain. He thought this was peculiar but continued on to the emergency call. When the MPs arrived at 544 Castle Drive, they found the back screen door closed, but the door itself open. One MP named Richard Tavere took a flashlight and went around to the back of the apartment. He entered through the utility room and walked into the master bedroom. Only 2 feet into the room, he saw 2 adults lying on the floor. He immediately left the way he had come and returned to the front to alert the other officers. The MPs entered the home and found a horrifying scene. Jeffrey MacDonald was lying on the floor next to his wife Colette in the master bedroom. The floor was covered in blood. MacDonald was conscious but injured. He wore only pajama bottoms. A blue pajama top lay across the chest of his wife. Colette McDonald was 26 years old and clearly dead. Her head had been struck with such tremendous force that her skull was visible. Her body had been stabbed and punctured many times with both a knife and an ice pick. The word pig was written in blood on the headboard of the bed above where her body lay. Down the hallway, the MPs found the bodies of the two young daughters. 5-year-old Kimberly was in her bedroom, tucked into bed. Her head had been battered and her neck was slashed. 2-year-old Kristen was also in her bed. She had been stabbed repeatedly, with many wounds concentrated in her heart area. All 3 victims had suffered brutal and savage attacks. Only Jeffrey McDonald was alive. He had a puncture wound to his chest that caused one lung to partially collapse, along with cuts and bruises on his face and chest, and a mild concussion. The staff surgeon who treated him described the chest wound as a clean, small, sharp incision. McDonald was immediately taken to nearby Womack Hospital for treatment. He was released after 1 week. Once McDonald was conscious and able to speak, he told military police and investigators his version of what happened that night. He said he had fallen asleep on the living room couch because his younger daughter Kristen had wet the bed in the master bedroom. He was awakened by the screams of his wife Colette. When he opened his eyes, he saw 4 intruders standing over him in the living room. There were 3 men and 1 woman. The woman had long blonde hair and wore a floppy hat and boots. She was holding a flickering candle. One of the men held what looked like a baseball bat. Another had a knife. As McDonald struggled to get up, the intruders chanted, "Acid is groovy," and "Kill the pigs." He recognized these phrases as similar to words used in the recent Charles Manson murders in California. The Manson family had killed actress Sharon Tate and others in August 1969 and had written the word "pig" in blood at that crime scene. McDonald said his blue pajama top was pulled over his head and became wrapped around his wrists during the struggle. He used the pajama top to try to block the blows from the attackers. He felt a sharp pain in his chest when he was stabbed with an ice pick. One of the men struck him in the head with what he thought was a baseball bat. He eventually passed out face down on the living room floor. When he regained consciousness, the house was silent and the intruders were gone. He went to check on his family and found them all dead or dying. He said he attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on both of his daughters but could not save them. He went to the master bedroom and found Colette with a small knife stuck in her chest. He pulled the knife out and covered her body with his blue pajama top. He then went to the bathroom to check his own stab wound before calling for help. He made 2 phone calls, first using the phone in the bedroom and then the phone in the kitchen. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division immediately began investigating the crime. As investigators carefully examined the physical evidence at 544 Castle Drive, they quickly came to doubt McDonald's story. Although McDonald claimed he fought for his life against 3 armed men in the living room, that room showed very few signs of any struggle. A coffee table had been knocked onto its side with a pile of magazines beneath the edge. A flower plant had fallen to the floor. But for a violent fight involving 4 people and multiple weapons, the living room looked remarkably undisturbed. McDonald said he was trained in unarmed combat as a Green Beret, yet the room where he supposedly battled 3 attackers showed almost no evidence of such a fight. When investigators questioned the neighbors who lived in the apartments around the McDonald home, they said they had heard no sounds of any struggle or disturbance during the early morning hours. However, they did hear Colette shouting in a loud and angry voice. The neighbors living upstairs had a teenage daughter who occasionally babysat for the McDonald children. She told investigators that in the month before the murders, Jeffrey and Colette had seemed distant and indifferent to each other. The neighbor's dog did not bark until after the military police arrived at the scene. This seemed strange if 4 intruders had been in the area. The physical evidence told a story very different from McDonald's account. Although it had rained heavily on the night of February 16th into the 17th, and McDonald specifically claimed the female intruders' boots were all wet with rainwater just dripping off them, investigators found only 1 footprint at the entire crime scene. That single footprint was a bloody bare footprint in Kristen's bedroom that led from the child's bed toward the doorway. There were no wet footprints or muddy tracks from 4 intruders anywhere in the apartment. The back door that the intruders supposedly used to enter showed no signs of forced entry. By mid-March, investigators had received results from forensic testing of blood, hair, and fiber samples collected from the apartment. These results contradicted MacDonald's story in numerous important ways. The MacDonald family was fortunate in one respect for the investigation. Each member of the family had a different blood type, which allowed investigators to track movements throughout the apartment. Colette was type A, MacDonald was type B, Kimberly was type AB, and Kristen was type O. Blood evidence showed that Kimberly's type AB blood was found in the master bedroom, even though MacDonald claimed she had never left her own room. This suggested Kimberly had been attacked in the master bedroom first, possibly after being awakened by the sound of her parents fighting. Kimberly's blood was also found on MacDonald's blue pajama top, even though he claimed he was not wearing the top when he went to her room to try to save her. MacDonald's own type B blood was found in only 2 specific locations in significant quantities. His blood was in front of the kitchen cabinet that contained rubber gloves, and on the right side of a hallway bathroom sink. This did not match his story of being attacked in the living room and then going directly to help his family. Colette's type A blood was found in Kristen's room, even though all 3 victims were found in separate rooms. This suggested the victims had not been attacked where they were found, but had been moved after death. The most damaging physical evidence involved MacDonald's blue pajama top. This piece of clothing would become the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case. When crime scene investigators first arrived, they found the pajama top lying across Colette's chest in the master bedroom. When the top was examined at the Army Criminal Investigation Laboratory at Fort Gordon, analysts counted 48 puncture holes in the fabric, along with 2 cuts. 17 of the puncture holes were in the back of the garment. This struck investigators as extremely odd, since MacDonald had received no stab wounds to his back. Medical reports from Womack Hospital showed he had only 4 puncture-type wounds on his body, and none of them were on his back. Investigators theorized that the 48 holes were created when MacDonald placed his pajama top on Colette's chest and then stabbed her repeatedly through the fabric with an ice pick. In 1971, the FBI was asked to examine some of the physical evidence. Paul Stombaugh, the chief of the chemistry section of the FBI crime laboratory, studied the puncture holes under a microscope. He made a crucial discovery. All 48 puncture holes were perfectly round with smooth edges and no tearing or ragged marks around them. This proved that the pajama top was lying completely still and stationary when it was punctured. If the pajama top had been moving during a struggle, as MacDonald claimed when he said he wrapped it around his wrists to block the ice pick attacks, the holes would have shown tearing and irregular edges as the fabric shifted and pulled with each blow. Stombaugh and his team conducted detailed experiments to see if the 48 holes in the pajama top matched the wounds in Colette's body. Laboratory technician Shirley Green spent over a week working on this problem. She eventually discovered that when the pajama top was folded in a specific way, with the right sleeve turned inside out exactly as it had been found on Colette's chest, all 48 holes could be aligned with just 21 wounds in Colette's body. Green used 3 different methods to prove this, including using steel rods inserted through the holes to create a pattern. The pattern created by inserting 21 probes through the 48 holes in the pajama top matched exactly with the 2 groups of 21 ice pick wounds found in Colette's chest. This was exactly like fitting pieces of broken glass from a car headlight back into the light on a suspect's vehicle at a hit-and-run scene. The evidence strongly suggested that MacDonald had stabbed his pregnant wife through his own pajama top while it lay on her chest. Even more damaging to MacDonald's story, Stombaugh discovered that the pajama top had been heavily stained with Colette's blood in 4 separate places before the garment was torn. This meant Colette was already bleeding, and the pajama top was already bloody when MacDonald supposedly ripped it over his head during his fight with the intruders. The cuts in the pajama tops worn by Colette, Kimberly, and Kristen were all made by the same knife, a straight, sharp old hickory knife that was found outside the back door. But the 2 cuts in MacDonald's pajama top were made by a different knife, the dull bent Geneva forge paring knife found inside the house. Most importantly, there were no cuts in MacDonald's pajama top that lined up with the stab wound that punctured his lung. Investigators found blue fibers from MacDonald's pajama top throughout the house. 81 pajama fibers were in the master bedroom. 24 were found under Colette's body. 22 were on the bed in the master bedroom. 6 were on the pillowcase, and 1 was found near the headboard where the word pig was written in Colette's blood. 19 pajama fibers were found in the bedding where Kimberly's body was wrapped, and 3 were on Kristen's bedspread. But significantly, not a single fiber or thread from MacDonald's blue pajama top was found in the living room where he claimed the violent attack took place. This absence of evidence in the living room contradicted his entire story. Other evidence also pointed to MacDonald's guilt. A club made from a piece of wood measuring 31 inches long was found outside with blood on it. This club had been sawed from one of the wooden slats in Kimberly's bed. The club was used to beat Colette and Kimberly. Wood splinters matching this club were found throughout the house, including in Colette's hand, under her body, on the master bedroom bed, under the covers in Kimberly's room, and on Kristen's bed. But no wood splinters were found in the living room where the supposed fight occurred. Investigators found a torn piece of rubber from a surgical glove inside the bedding near Colette's body. This matched a box of surgical gloves found under the kitchen sink. A bath mat from the Hilton Hotel was found on Colette's abdomen, bearing multiple bloody handprints and impressions that matched the shape of the old hickory knife and the ice pick, along with streaks that showed the weapons had been wiped clean on the mat. Crime scene photos and blood evidence convinced investigators that Colette's body had been moved after death. A blue bedsheet and a multicolored bedspread from the master bed were found crumpled together near the closet with a piece of the surgical glove inside. Blood stain patterns on these items suggested MacDonald had wrapped Colette's body in the bedding and moved her from one location to another within the house. The bedding contained 28 blood stains, with 26 being Colette's type A blood. Investigators believed MacDonald used the bedding to transport Colette's body, and possibly Kimberly's body as well. Perhaps most damning was what investigators found in the living room. Lying on the floor was a copy of Esquire magazine that contained a detailed article about the recent Tate LaBianca murders committed by Charles Manson's hippie family in California. The article described how the Manson followers had written the word pig in blood at their crime scene. MacDonald's eyeglasses, which he claimed he was not wearing during or after the struggle, were found in the living room with Kristen's type O blood on the part of the lens that had been in contact with the floor. On the 1st of May 1970, the Army formally charged MacDonald with 3 counts of murder. Because the murders occurred on a military base and MacDonald was an active duty Army officer, he was entitled to an Article 32 hearing, which is similar to a civilian grand jury or preliminary hearing. The hearing lasted for months and included testimony from numerous witnesses and experts. However, on the 13th of October 1970, the presiding officer, Colonel Warren Rock, issued a surprising report. He recommended that all charges against MacDonald be dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Rock added that he did not believe there was any truth to the charges, and that the nature of the murders suggested they were committed by more than one person. Shortly after this decision, MacDonald was honorably discharged from the Army. He moved to California and began a new life. MacDonald found employment as an emergency room physician at St. Mary Medical Center in Long Beach, California, where he frequently worked long hours. He also became an instructor at the UCLA Medical School, served as medical director of the Long Beach Grand Prix, gave lectures about recognizing and treating child abuse, and participated in developing a national cardiopulmonary resuscitation training program. MacDonald lived in a $350,000 condominium apartment in Huntington Beach and was known to have lived a promiscuous lifestyle. He formed a long-term relationship with a 22-year-old airline stewardess named Candy Kramer in the late 1972. In the years after the charges were dismissed, MacDonald received abundant emotional and public support. Many people believed he was innocent and had been wrongly accused by an incompetent investigation. But not everyone believed in MacDonald's innocence. Colette's stepfather, Freddie Kassab, had initially been one of MacDonald's strongest supporters. Kassab was born in Montreal to wealthy Syrian parents and had been educated in private schools in Europe. He met Colette's mother, Mildred Stevenson, in 1957 on Long Island after Mildred's first husband had committed suicide in 1956. Freddie and Mildred married and enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle before falling on hard times. When MacDonald was first accused, Kassab defended him vigorously and publicly proclaimed his son-in-law's innocence. However, in March 1971, Kassab visited the crime scene at 544 Castle Drive for several hours with the cooperation of Army investigators. He carefully studied the physical evidence and compared it against MacDonald's testimony. This personal assessment completely changed Kassab's mind and convinced him that MacDonald was guilty of murdering his family. From that moment forward, Kassab devoted his life to pursuing every legal avenue to bring MacDonald to justice. Because MacDonald had been discharged from the army, the only way Kassab could bring him to trial was through a citizen's complaint filed with the United States Department of Justice. Kassab filed this complaint in early 1972. However, legal complications arose about whether the case could proceed, since the murders had occurred while MacDonald was in military service, but he had since been discharged. The FBI initially refused to take the case. Between 1972 and 1974, the case remained stuck in limbo at the Department of Justice as lawyers debated whether sufficient evidence and probable cause existed for indictment and prosecution. Meanwhile, galvanized by Kassab's relentless pressure and criticism, Army detectives resumed their investigation. Colonel Jack Pruitt and Warrant Officer Peter Kearns led a thorough reinvestigation that began in late 1970 and was completed in 1972. They assembled a team of 8 agents and examined the original investigation in minute detail. They interviewed 699 people, pursued leads in 32 states, and had evidence reanalyzed by both Army investigators and the FBI. On the 1st of June 1972, they submitted a 10,000-page report recommending that MacDonald be prosecuted for murdering his family. The report was beyond thorough and presented a mountain of circumstantial and forensic evidence pointing to MacDonald's guilt. Kearns also narrated and produced a film about the case that was eventually shown to the Department of Justice. Finally, on the 24th of January 1975, a federal grand jury voted to indict Jeffrey MacDonald on 3 counts of murder. The road to trial was long and complicated, with multiple pre-trial motions and appeals that delayed the case. More than 9 years after the murders, MacDonald finally faced trial on the 16th of July, 1979 in Raleigh, North Carolina, before Judge Franklin Dupree. MacDonald pleaded not guilty to all charges. He was defended by attorneys Bernard Siegel and Wade Smith. Prosecutors James Blackburn and Brian Murtaugh presented the case for the government. The trial lasted 7 weeks and included extensive physical and circumstantial evidence supported by expert and lay testimony. Judge Dupree made several rulings that hurt the defense case. He refused to admit a 1,979 psychiatric evaluation that suggested someone with MacDonald's personality was highly unlikely to be capable of killing his family. Dupree said that since MacDonald's attorneys had not entered an insanity plea, he did not want psychiatric testimony from both sides to hinder the trial. The judge also ruled that Helena Stokely could not testify. Stokely was a 17-year-old drug-using police informant in the local hippie community who had made vague statements suggesting she might have been present during the murders. She was known to wear a blonde wig, boots, and a large floppy hat, similar to the woman MacDonald described. She was possibly the same woman the MP saw standing in the rain a few blocks from the MacDonald home. However, Stokely said she was high that night and could not remember her whereabouts or be sure about anything. Judge Dupree ruled her statements were too unreliable and conflicted with established facts, so she was not allowed to testify at trial. When MacDonald took the stand in his own defense, attorney Bernard Siegel questioned him gently to humanize him before the jury. MacDonald described each family member and their personalities, saying the family shared almost everything and were all friends. He said he had never remarried because he was unable to forget his wife and children, whom he thought about every day. He recounted his family background, his career at Fort Bragg, and his family's lifestyle in February 1970. Siegel showed him family photographs and asked him to describe them and identify people in each image. Under this gentle questioning, MacDonald performed well. But everything changed when prosecutor James Blackburn began his cross-examination. Blackburn systematically went through the physical evidence and asked MacDonald to explain the many contradictions between the forensic findings and his testimony. He questioned MacDonald about adjusting his story after learning that fibers from his pajama top were found beneath Colette's body. He asked direct questions about the location of blood, fibers, and other evidence that directly contradicted MacDonald's accounts of his movements and those of his family members. Blackburn frequently asked hypothetical questions, saying if the jury should find from the evidence that something contradicted MacDonald's testimony, could he offer any plausible explanation? MacDonald often tried to deflect these questions with indifferent shrugs, but he was typically unable to explain away the damaging evidence. His old cockiness began to show through, and his performance failed to convince the jury. FBI analyst Paul Stombaugh led the jury through a clear explanation of the blue pajama top and its critical importance to the case. He showed how all 48 ice pick holes were smooth and cylindrical, which proved the jacket remained completely stationary when punctured. This was highly unlikely if MacDonald had wrapped the jacket around his hands to defend himself while dodging multiple blows. Stombaugh demonstrated how folding the jacket in one specific way allowed all 48 puncture marks to have been made by just 21 thrusts of an ice pick, exactly matching the 21 ice pick wounds on Colette's chest. The implication was clear. Stombaugh was saying MacDonald's story was a complete fabrication. The truth was that Colette MacDonald had been repeatedly stabbed through the pajama top by her enraged husband, who then invented the story of 4 hippie intruders to cover his actions. The defense tried to challenge this conclusion by having their own forensic expert, James Thornton, stab a ham wrapped in a pajama top while an assistant moved it back and forth. Thornton claimed this produced perfectly round holes with no tearing, but prosecutors Murtaugh and Blackburn responded with an impromptu demonstration in the courtroom. Murtaugh wrapped a similar pajama top around his hands, while Blackburn tried to stab him with the ice pick used in the murders. The demonstration showed the difficulty of MacDonald's claimed scenario. Prosecutors suggested that MacDonald killed his family during an argument with Colette that spiraled out of control. The noise from this fight woke up Kimberly, who came into the master bedroom and was struck by her father in the chaos. Once Kimberly was injured or dead, MacDonald realized he had reached a point of no return. He could not let there be any witnesses who could tell what really happened. He systematically killed all 3 members of his family, then staged the crime scene to make it look like hippie intruders had committed the murders. He used the Esquire magazine article about the Manson murders as a template. Some experts have suggested MacDonald may have been using amphetamines, which were common among soldiers at Fort Bragg at that time, and that drug use may have contributed to a psychotic rage. On the 29th of August, 1979, after 7 weeks of trial, both sides delivered closing arguments. The jury deliberated for 6.5 hours. Shortly after 4 in the afternoon, they announced they had reached a verdict. MacDonald was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder in the death of Kristen and 2 counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of Colette and Kimberly. 4 jurors wept as they read the verdicts. MacDonald's mother rushed out of the courtroom. MacDonald himself showed no emotion whatsoever. Judge Dupree immediately imposed a sentence of life imprisonment for each of the 3 murders, to be served consecutively. MacDonald's bail was revoked, and he was temporarily transferred to a county jail before being moved to the Federal Correctional Institution in Terminal Island, California. Immediately after the verdict, Freddie Kassab called the family lawyer Richard Kahn and said, "Hi Dick, I just got what I wanted." It had taken 9 years, but Kassab finally saw justice for his stepdaughter and her children. MacDonald has never stopped fighting his conviction. He has filed numerous appeals over the decades, challenging various aspects of his trial and claiming newly discovered evidence proves his innocence. In 1980, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed his conviction in a 2-1 decision, ruling that the 9-year delay before trial violated his Sixth Amendment right to a speedy trial. McDonald was released on $100,000 bail and returned to work as the director of emergency medicine at St. Mary's Medical Center in Long Beach. But in 1982, the United States Supreme Court reversed that decision and reinstated his convictions. In what became one of the most extraordinary civil cases in American legal history, McDonald sued author Joe McGinniss in 1984. Before the trial, McDonald had hired McGinniss to write a book about the case that would prove his innocence. McGinniss attended the entire trial and interviewed McDonald extensively. However, McGinniss became convinced during his research that McDonald was guilty. In 1983, he published Fatal Vision, which presented detailed arguments for McDonald's guilt and suggested he killed his family in a psychotic rage, possibly fueled by amphetamine use. McDonald expected the book to show his innocence, but instead, it portrayed him as a cold-blooded killer. McDonald sued for fraud and breach of contract. In August 1987, the civil trial jury deadlocked and could not reach a verdict. The case was settled out of court in November 1987, with McDonald receiving $325,000. Colette's parents, the Kassabs, then sued McDonald to prevent him from profiting from his crimes. This suit was also settled, with the Kassabs receiving a portion of the book proceeds, but also paying for McDonald's legal expenses. McDonald continued his legal battles for decades. In 2012, his defense team tried to introduce new DNA analysis of 3 human hairs found at the crime scene that did not match McDonald or any of the victims. They also sought to include evidence from a deputy United States Marshal who claimed Helena Stokely told him in 1979 that prosecutors threatened her with murder charges if she testified that she was in the McDonald home the Whiter time, night of the murders. However, United States District Court judges and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected these requests for a new trial in 2014 and again in 2018. The Supreme Court declined to hear McDonald's case in 2019, effectively ending his legal options for appeal. McDonald has been imprisoned for over 40 years. He first became eligible for parole in 1991, but his first parole hearing was not held until May 2005. At that hearing, McDonald refused to accept responsibility for the murders and was denied parole. He has consistently maintained his innocence and has never admitted to killing his family, even when admitting guilt might improve his chances for parole. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, McDonald filed a motion for compassionate release. He was 77 years old at the time and suffering from chronic kidney disease, skin cancer, and high blood pressure. His attorneys argued these health conditions, combined with his age and the pandemic, constituted extraordinary circumstances warranting his release. However, courts ruled they lacked jurisdiction to consider his motion because of when his crimes occurred. In September 2021, McDonald voluntarily dismissed his appeal of this ruling. Jeffrey Robert McDonald remains incarcerated today at the Federal Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. He is now 81 years old and is known as Federal Inmate number 00131-177. He has spent over 45 years in prison and has served consecutive life sentences. Throughout his decades of imprisonment, McDonald has never wavered from his claim that 4 hippie intruders killed his family and that he is innocent. He has remarried during his imprisonment to a woman named Catherine McDonald, who has advocated for his release and maintains his innocence. However, prosecutors and the families of the victims remain convinced of his guilt. The acting United States Attorney for Eastern North Carolina said in 2021 that McDonald did the unthinkable more than 50 years ago when he murdered his pregnant wife and 2 daughters in brutal fashion, and their office will continue seeking justice every day until McDonald's efforts to escape justice cease for good. The McDonald case remains one of the most heavily litigated murder cases in American criminal history. The house at 544 Castle Drive remained a crime scene for 9.5 years and was boarded up for 14 years total. The Justice Department released it back to the military in 1983. By 1987, it had been renovated into a duplex, and families began living there again. People continued to stop on the street to take pictures of the home for years. Some knocked on the door and asked to look inside. The building was finally torn down in March 2008 to make way for a community recreation center and swimming pool. Today, more than 54 years after the murders of Colette, Kimberly, and Kristen McDonald, Jeffrey MacDonald remains behind bars, still proclaiming his innocence while the physical evidence and jury verdict declare his guilt. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Lori Vallow Daybell, 2019, The Doomsday Mom Murders. Lori Vallow Daybell, 2019, The Doomsday Mom Murders. Lori Noreen Cox was born on the 26th of June, 1973, in Loma Linda, California. She grew up in a Mormon family with unusual beliefs. Her parents were tax protesters who followed sovereign citizen ideology and fought with the Internal Revenue Service for nearly 2 decades. Lori and her siblings, including her brother Alex Cox, who would later play a tragic role in her story, were raised in this environment of distrust toward government authority. Despite this unconventional upbringing, Lori appeared to be a normal young woman with dreams of a happy family life. At age 19 in 1992, Lori married her high school sweetheart, but the marriage was brief and ended in divorce shortly after. In October 1995, Lori married William LaJoya and gave birth to a son named Colby Ryan in 1996. This marriage also failed, and the couple divorced in 1998. Lori worked as a hairdresser for a period during these years. In 2001, she married Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr. in Hawaii, though they lived together in Texas at the time. On the 24th of September 2002, Lori gave birth to a daughter named Tylee Ryan. Joseph adopted Colby, who took his stepfather's last name. Friends and family later said Lori had a difficult relationship with Joseph, and the marriage ended in divorce on the 18th of May 2005. Joseph Ryan died of a heart attack in 2018 and was cremated. In 2004, Lori competed in the Mrs. Texas beauty pageant and appeared as a contestant on the television game show Wheel of Fortune, showing her interest in the spotlight and public attention. On the 24th of February 2006, Lori married Leland Charles Anthony Vallow, who went by the name Charles, in Las Vegas. This was her 4th marriage and his 2nd. Charles was a successful businessman who worked as an insurance agent and had a comfortable lifestyle. In 2013, the couple adopted Charles's grandnephew, a boy named Joshua Jackson Vallow, who was called JJ by everyone who knew him. JJ's biological parents were unable to care for him due to substance abuse problems. JJ was born with drugs in his system and spent time in the neonatal intensive care unit as a newborn. Charles's sister Kay Woodcock and her husband Larry cared for JJ for nearly his first year of life before Charles and Lori adopted him. JJ was eventually diagnosed with autism and required special care and attention. By all accounts, JJ and his older sister Tylee were very close, despite their age difference. Friends who knew the family during these years said Lori appeared to be a patient and loving mother who was ideal for raising a child with special needs. Around 2014, Charles and Lori moved with JJ and Tylee to the Hawaiian island of Kauai. It was during this time that Lori became obsessed with books written by an author named Chad Daybell. Chad wrote a series of fictional novels called Standing in Holy Places that centered on apocalyptic scenarios loosely based on Mormon theology. Friends later described Lori as a superfan of Chad's work. She bought his books for friends and talked constantly about the author and his ideas about preparing for the end of the world. Lori started listening to podcasts about near-death experiences and the afterlife. She became increasingly invested in radical religious beliefs that went far beyond mainstream Mormon teachings. The family eventually moved from Hawaii to Arizona sometime between 2016 and 2017. Chad Guy Daybell was born on the 11th of August 1968 in Provo, Utah, to a Mormon family and grew up in the neighboring city of Springville. On the 9th of March 1990, Chad married Tammy Douglas. The couple raised their family in Springville, where they established Spring Creek Book Company, through which Chad published many of his books. Chad claimed to have near-death experiences and visions that gave him special knowledge about the end times and the spirit world. He wrote more than 24 books about prophecies, doomsday events, and preparations for the second coming of Jesus Christ. Chad and Tammy had 5 children together before moving to Salem, Idaho in 2015. Tammy worked as a school librarian and was described as a devoted mother and wife. Chad claimed he heard a voice telling him to move to Idaho and said he had a vision that Utah would be devastated by an earthquake in 2015. In October 2018, Lori attended a Preparing a People event, which was a gathering for people interested in end times prophecies and preparation. She went with 2 women she had recently befriended, named Melanie Gibb and Zulema Pastanes. At this event, Lori met Chad Daybell in person for the first time. He was teaching an evening class at a Latter-day Saints church. The attraction between Lori and Chad was immediate and intense. Friends later said it was like a fatal attraction or a perfect storm when these 2 people with extreme beliefs found each other. Chad was doing his thing with doomsday prophecies, and Lori was already listening to podcasts by people who claimed to have visions about the end times. Their meeting brought together 2 people who were ready to be taken by radical religious ideas. Lori and Chad quickly developed an affair. They communicated constantly and met whenever possible, despite both being married to other people. Chad and Lori began teaching their friends about a belief system involving light and dark spirits, zombies, and the scale of light and dark. They claimed to be able to determine whether someone's body was possessed by a dark spirit, which they called a zombie. They said these zombies had to be cast out or eliminated to prepare for the second coming of Christ. Lori told friends that she was a translated being who was in the process of changing from a mortal human to an immortal celestial being. She claimed she was a god, preparing for the end of days. Chad told people he had lived many past lives and could see the future. By early 2019, Lori's behavior had become alarming to her husband Charles. In January 2019, Charles Vallow went to the police in Gilbert, Arizona, with serious concerns about his wife. Police body camera video from the 31st of January 2019 shows Charles telling officers that Lori had become unhinged. He said she believed she was a god preparing for the end of days and claimed to be a sexual goddess destined to help usher in the apocalypse. Charles told police Lori had threatened to murder him. He was clearly frightened and desperate for help. Charles filed for divorce from Lori in February 2019. In the divorce documents, Charles stated he feared for his and his children's safety. He wrote that Lori had threatened to kill him and had become obsessed with bizarre religious beliefs. Text messages and emails later recovered by police showed that Lori referred to Charles as Hiplos or Ned, which were names of dark spirits she claimed had possessed him. She told members of her religious group that Charles had become a zombie. Several of Lori's friends joined together to pray for Charles's demise. Charles discovered that Lori was having an affair with Chad Daybell. 11 days before his death, Charles sent an email to Tammy Daybell to inform her that their spouses were cheating on each other. Evidence later showed that Tammy opened and deleted the message and blocked Charles's email address. On the 1st of July 2019, Charles informed Lori that he planned to meet with Tammy in person. At that point, Chad and Lori were communicating constantly, using burner phones to hide their communications. On the 11th of July 2019, Charles Vallow flew to Arizona to pick up JJ and take him to school. He arrived at Lori's rental home in Chandler early that morning. Lori's brother Alex Cox was also present at the house. An argument broke out between Charles and Lori. Tylee, who was 16 years old, later told police she heard the argument from her bedroom and grabbed a baseball bat. She said her first instinct was to protect herself and JJ. Tylee said she stepped into the hallway with the bat and positioned herself between Charles and her mother. According to Tylee, Alex Cox was standing protectively behind Charles. Charles allegedly took the bat away from Tylee. The situation escalated quickly. Alex Cox claimed he grabbed Charles from behind and they got into a physical fight on the ground. Cox said Charles was hitting him with the baseball bat and that he feared for his life. Cox stated he went to his bedroom, got his pistol, and returned to find Charles charging at him. Cox told police he shot Charles twice in self-defense, while Charles was standing up. However, forensic evidence at the scene told a different story. The second gunshot wound entered below Charles's rib cage and exited through his upper left shoulder, leaving a defect in the floor where his body was found. This angle proved that Charles was already lying on the floor when the second shot was fired. After the shooting, Lori took Charles's rental car and cell phone and left the house with Tylee and JJ. Surveillance footage from a Burger King showed Lori and the children going through the drive-thru at 7:54 in the morning. Alex Cox did not call 911 until 8:36, a full 43 minutes after the shooting. Cox never performed CPR on Charles despite telling police he did. When police interviewed Lori after she returned to the scene, witnesses described her as calm and non-emotional. She was laughing and having general conversations. When officers informed her that Charles was dead, she said she already knew because she had been present when it happened. Charles Vallow was 62 years old when he died. The Maricopa County medical examiner ruled his death a homicide caused by multiple gunshot wounds. Alex Cox claimed self-defense and was never charged with any crime at that time. Text messages recovered later showed that the day before Charles died, Lori reached out to someone saying, "It's coming to a head this week, will change everything." She told Alex Cox lots to do, "Thank you for standing by me." Police found text messages and emails that indicated the murder was intentional and part of a master plan. After Charles's death, Lori moved quickly to relocate herself and her children. In late August or early September 2019, she moved Tylee and JJ from Arizona to Rexburg, Idaho, where Chad Daybell lived. She rented an apartment in the same complex where her brother Alex Cox also moved. Lori was now living just minutes away from Chad. On the 8th of September 2019, Lori took Tylee, JJ, and Alex Cox on a day trip to Yellowstone National Park. Photos from that trip show the group together enjoying the scenery. This was the last time anyone saw Tylee alive. The photos entered into evidence at trial were some of the last images of the 16-year-old girl before she vanished. Friends later testified that Lori had told them Tylee had become a zombie, meaning her spirit had left her body and she had become dark. One friend named Melanie Gibb was on the phone with Lori and heard Lori call Tylee a zombie, to which Tylee responded, "Not me, Mom." This arose from an argument about Tylee having to babysit JJ when she did not want to. Lori told Gibb that Tylee had turned into a zombie when she was 12 or 13. Around the same time, Tylee had become difficult to deal with. The morning after Tylee disappeared, cell phone records showed that Alex Cox's phone was at Chad Daybell's property for about 2 hours, starting around 7:30 in the morning on the 9th of September 2019. The GPS location placed him in Chad's backyard near the fire pit. About 14 minutes after Cox's phone showed him leaving Chad's property, Chad sent a text message to his wife, Tammy. The text read, "I've had an interesting morning. I felt I should burn all of the limb debris by the fire pit before it got too soaked by the coming storms. While I did so, I spotted a big raccoon along the fence. I hurried and got my gun, and he was still walking along. I got close enough that one shot did the trick. He is now in our pet cemetery. Fun times." Investigators later found this text suspicious because raccoons are nocturnal animals and are not regularly active during the daytime. Neighbors later confirmed that Chad's son Garth had told them about Chad shooting a raccoon out of a tree during the day in mid-July, and they thought it was strange. About 2 weeks after Tylee vanished, JJ Vallow also disappeared. On the weekend of September 21 and 22, Melanie Gibb and her boyfriend David Warwick were staying with Lori at her Rexburg apartment. On the evening of September 22, Warwick said he saw Alex Cox carry JJ into Lori's apartment. But the next morning, on September 23, when Warwick asked to see JJ, Lori told them that JJ was being a zombie and that Alex had to take him away. She said JJ had climbed on the kitchen cabinets and knocked a picture of Jesus off the refrigerator. The FBI later analyzed Alex Cox's cell phone movements on the morning of the 23rd of September 2019. His phone showed he was at Chad Daybell's property from 9:55 until 10:12 in the morning, a total of 17 minutes. The GPS placed him near a pond on the property. The last time anyone saw JJ alive was late on the 22nd of September 2019. On the 9th of October 2019, Tammy Daybell called 911 to report that a masked man had shot at her in her driveway with what she thought was a paintball gun. She posted about the frightening experience on Facebook, saying she had no idea who the person was or why they would shoot at her. Court documents later revealed that Alex Cox had attempted to shoot and kill Tammy that day but failed. Just 10 days later, on the 19th of October 2019, Tammy Daybell died at her home in Salem, Idaho. She was 49 years old. Chad called 911 and said he and his son Garth had found Tammy dead in bed. The Daybell children initially declined an autopsy. The local coroner told them Tammy's death appeared to be from natural causes. Tammy was quickly buried without any investigation into the cause of death. Chad had increased Tammy's life insurance policy before her death. He received $430,000 in life insurance benefits after her death. Just 2 weeks after Tammy died, on the 5th of November 2019, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow were married on a beach in Hawaii. They posed for wedding photos with flower leis around their necks on the picturesque shores of Kauai. The ceremony seemed perfect except that none of their family members or friends were present. Lori's mother, Janice Cox, later said she did not know Lori had married Chad until she saw it on television. Lori and Chad enjoyed a honeymoon in Hawaii while Tylee and JJ lay buried in shallow graves on Chad's Idaho property. Lori was seen wearing a wedding ring that had been purchased using Charles Vallow's Amazon account. The order records showed the rings had been ordered in early October, just 2 weeks before Tammy died. On the 26th of November 2019, Rexburg police conducted a child welfare check at Lori's townhouse at the request of JJ's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock. The Woodcocks had grown increasingly worried because their once regular phone calls with JJ had become infrequent and then stopped completely. Lori would not tell them why JJ was always unavailable. When police arrived, they first spoke to Alex Cox and Chad Daybell outside the townhouse complex. Chad acted as if he did not know Lori despite having just married her. Alex told police JJ was fine and was with his grandmother, Kay Woodcock, in Louisiana. This was clearly a lie since Kay Woodcock was the one who asked police to do the welfare check. When officers finally spoke to Lori, she claimed JJ was with a friend named Melanie Gibb in Arizona. The next day, police returned with a search warrant, but Lori and Chad had fled. They left Rexburg and flew to Hawaii. In December 2019, when the world learned that 2 children were missing, Lori and Chad were living in paradise while police desperately searched for 7-year-old JJ and 16-year-old Tylee. On the 12th of December 2019, Alex Cox was found dead in his home in Gilbert, Arizona. He was unresponsive when a witness discovered him. An autopsy determined Cox died of natural causes from a pulmonary embolism, though police said they were still investigating the death. Cox had married Zulema Pastens just 2 weeks before he died. With Alex Cox's death, the only living witness to Charles Vallow's shooting was gone. In January 2020, police in Hawaii located Lori and Chad. They served Lori with a court order demanding she physically produce Tylee and JJ to authorities in Idaho. She was given a deadline of the 30th of January 2020 to present the children. Journalist Nate Eaton with East Idaho News confronted Lori and Chad on camera in Hawaii shortly after they were stopped by police. "Where are your kids?" Eaton asked the couple. Lori replied no comment as she and Chad walked away. Lori failed to produce the children by the deadline. On the 20th of February 2020, Lori was arrested in Hawaii and charged with 2 felony counts of desertion and non-support of dependent children. She was also charged with 3 misdemeanors. Lori was extradited back to Idaho to face the charges. On the 9th of June 2020, law enforcement executed a search warrant on Chad Daybell's property in Salem, Idaho. Multiple agencies, including the FBI, participated in the search. Investigators had spent months gathering evidence from cell phone records, text messages, and witness statements. They knew from GPS data that Alex Cox's phone had pinged in 2 specific locations on Chad's property on the days the children disappeared. When officers began excavating the area near the fire pit and Pet Cemetery, where Tammy's sister said she knew the pet cemetery was located, they made a horrifying discovery. During the search of the disturbed ground, buried cat and dog remains were found. When investigators dug deeper using a backhoe, they located bricks approximately 1 foot below the ground. Underneath the bricks, they found charred human remains that were later identified as Tylee Ryan. Her body had been dismembered and burned. Parts of her remains were found mixed with burned debris near the pet cemetery. Investigators then moved to the area near a pond on the other side of Chad's property. They probed the ground with steel poles and found areas of disturbed earth. Using shovels to remove the top layer of sod, they discovered several large, flat rocks. Under the rocks were 2 pieces of flat paneling. When the paneling was removed, investigators saw a round object covered in black plastic. When a small incision was made in the plastic, a strong odor was immediately noticed. Underneath the black plastic was a layer of white plastic. Inside the layers of plastic, they found the body of 7-year-old J.J. Vallow. He was completely wrapped in plastic and bound with duct tape. Duct tape covered his mouth and was wound around his head. His arms were bound to his body with duct tape. The little boy had been asphyxiated with a plastic bag over his head secured by duct tape. Investigators believed JJ would have experienced fear and betrayal in his final moments as someone he trusted killed him. Chad Daybell was arrested on the 9th of June 2020 and charged with 2 felony counts of destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence. His bail was set at $1 million. The remains were transported to the Ada County Coroner's Office for forensic examination and identification. On the 13th of June 2020, Rexburg police officially confirmed that the human remains found on Chad's property belonged to J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. The Woodcock and Ryan families released a statement saying they were filled with unfathomable sadness that these 2 bright stars were stolen from us. The children's bodies being found confirmed what many had feared for months. Tylee and JJ had been murdered. On the 25th of May, 2021, both Chad and Lori were indicted by a grand jury on charges of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder for the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy Daybell. They were also charged with grand theft related to the children's benefits. Chad faced an insurance fraud charge related to Tammy's life insurance. In June 2021, Lori was separately indicted by a grand jury in Maricopa County, Arizona, on 1 count of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder for the death of Charles Vallow. Prosecutors said the evidence showed that Charles's death was a planned event necessary to prevent him from confronting Lori about her extreme religious beliefs. The death of Charles was also necessary for Chad and Lori to marry and fulfill their religious prophecy. Both Chad and Lori pleaded not guilty to all charges. In April 2022, Lori was ruled incompetent to stand trial and was committed to a mental health facility. However, after nearly a year of treatment, she was deemed fit to proceed with trial. Lori had not waived her right to a speedy trial, so she went to trial first, while Chad waived his right and delayed his trial. Lori's trial began on the 10th of April 2023 in Boise, Idaho, after a week of jury selection. The trial lasted 7 weeks and included testimony from dozens of witnesses. Prosecutors Rob Wood and Lindsay Blake presented extensive physical evidence, forensic testimony, and testimony from friends and family members who described Lori's bizarre religious beliefs. Witnesses testified about the grotesque discoveries of the children's bodies on Chad's property. FBI Special Agent Steve Daniels described how investigators recovered the remains layer by layer, using careful excavation techniques. Forensic experts testified about finding Tylee's DNA on a pickaxe recovered from Chad's property. They described the chopping and stabbing wounds found on Tylee's skeletal remains. The coroner ruled that JJ died from asphyxiation and Tylee died from homicide by unspecified means. A retired Idaho State Police laboratory chemist testified that decomposing flesh and debris from Tylee's remains contained gasoline, showing she had been burned after death. Prosecutors presented text messages between Chad and Lori that referred to people as zombies who needed to be eliminated. Friends testified that Lori had called both Tylee and JJ zombies before they disappeared. Colby Ryan, Lori's only surviving child, gave emotional testimony, describing his childhood as happy, but explaining how his mother had changed. In a recorded jail phone call played for the jury, Colby could be heard calling his mother a murderer and calling her out for the lies she had told him. Family members of the victims gave heartbreaking testimony about their grief and loss. The defense called no witnesses during the trial, and Lori did not testify in her own defense. Lori had pleaded not guilty to all charges. On the 12th of May 2023, after deliberating for 6.5 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all charges. Lori was convicted of first-degree murder in the deaths of both JJ and Tylee. She was convicted of 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of JJ, Tylee, and Tammy Daybell. She was also convicted of grand theft for stealing Social Security benefits. The judge noted the disgust he saw on jurors' faces during the trial. 4 jurors wept as the verdicts were read. Lori showed no emotion when the verdicts were announced. On the 31st of July 2023, Lori Vallow Daybell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Stephen Boyce sentenced her to multiple fixed life terms to be served consecutively rather than concurrently. The judge said it was important to punish her for each death separately. For the first time during the entire legal process, Lori spoke at her sentencing hearing. She spoke for approximately 8.5 minutes, but she did not show remorse or accept responsibility. Instead, Lori insisted she was not guilty of murder. She claimed, "Jesus Christ knows the truth and knows that no one was murdered in this case." Lori said she had undergone a personal transformation in 2002 when she had a near-death experience while giving birth to Tylee. She claimed that since then she has had access to heaven and the spirit world. She said she has had many communications from people now living in heaven, including her children. Lori told the court, "I know for a fact that my children are happy and busy in the spirit world." She claimed Tylee and JJ had visited her in spiritual form and told her they were happy and free. She said Tammy Daybell was also very happy and extremely busy in the afterlife. Judge Boyce was unmoved by Lori's remarks. He told her, "You chose the most evil and destructive path possible despite having many better options." He said murder is the most unimaginable type of murder when a mother murders her own children. The judge noted that Lori enjoyed a honeymoon in Hawaii while her children lay in shallow graves. He said he saw no sign that Lori felt any remorse for her actions. Prosecutor Rob Wood said that Tylee's body was utterly destroyed and she was buried in a pet cemetery next to animals. He said JJ likely endured fear and betrayal in his last moments and was then buried like a piece of trash. The judge sentenced Lori to 5 consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. She was also ordered to pay more than $60,000 in restitution. Chad Daybell's trial began on the 10th of April 2024, nearly a year after Lori's conviction. Prosecutors depicted Chad as a man motivated by sex, money, and power, who saw his wife and Lori's children as obstacles to his destiny. Chad's attorney claimed Lori had lured Chad into adultery and blamed Alex Cox for the violence. On the 30th of May 2024, Chad was found guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder in the deaths of Tammy, JJ, and Tylee. He was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. On the 1st of June 2024, Chad Daybell was sentenced to death. He is currently on death row at Idaho Maximum Security Institution. His attorneys have filed appeals. After her Idaho sentencing, Lori was extradited to Arizona to stand trial twice more. In March 2025, her trial began for conspiracy to murder Charles Vallow. Lori chose to represent herself in court, even though she is not a lawyer. She frequently clashed with the judge and was at times removed from the courtroom for being combative. Her brother Adam Cox testified that he had no doubt Lori and Alex conspired to kill Charles. He said that when he learned Charles had been shot, he immediately knew they killed him. On the 22nd of April 2025, Lori was found guilty of conspiring to murder Charles Vallow. Prosecutors argued she wanted his $1 million life insurance policy and wanted to be free to marry Chad. Lori's second Arizona trial began on the 29th of May 2025 for conspiracy to murder Brandon Boudreaux, the ex-husband of her niece Milani. On the 2nd of October 2019, Brandon was shot at outside his home when someone in a Jeep registered to Charles Vallow fired at him. The bullet missed his head by inches. On the 12th of June 2025, Lori was found guilty of conspiring to murder Brandon. On the 25th of July 2025, she was sentenced to 2 additional life sentences in Arizona to be served consecutively. Judge Justin Bareski said Lori had shattered lives and undermined trust. She received life sentences with the possibility of parole after 25 years for each conspiracy conviction. Lori Vallow Daybell is now 51 years old and is serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. She is incarcerated at Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. She has filed appeals of her convictions. In total, Lori has been convicted of murdering her 2 children, JJ and Tylee, conspiring to murder Tammy Daybell, conspiring to murder her husband Charles Vallow, and conspiring to murder Brandon Boudreaux. She has shown no remorse for any of these crimes and continues to claim she is innocent. She maintains that her victims are happy in the afterlife and that she was chosen by God for a special purpose. The case shocked the nation with its combination of child murder, doomsday cult beliefs, multiple suspicious deaths, and a mother's complete lack of empathy for her murdered children. Nearly 6 years after JJ and Tylee disappeared, justice has been served, but the horror of what happened to these innocent children will never be forgotten. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.